it up from last time. So.
Hello, and welcome to Jason Cabinet's Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cabinets. Our guest today is Ricardo Perez. Ricardo, are you ready to be great today?
Always.
Ricardo Perez grew up in South Texas, where he raised himself, almost didn't graduate high school, and served as a sniper who could have medically retired from the U.S. Army, but turned it down to save what little sanity he had left. After honorably discharging from a historically hard-hit unit, Ricardo received degrees in chemical engineering and chemistry, filed a utility patent, and is a graduate of the MS in Entrepreneurship program offered by the Foster School of Business at the University of Washington. Currently, he's a research scientist on the next generation sequencing team at the University of Washington Department of Virology. Hopes to be a Ph.D. student by the end of 2022. Ricardo, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So this is actually Ricardo's second time on the podcast. First time was a great conversation. And we just have so much to get going to. Like, if we wanted to, me and Ricardo talking pre-talk, we could actually talk at 20,000 hours just about different stuff, right? Because we just get along so good.
Yeah, definitely.
And so we'll probably go to do different subjects. First one I want to talk about is your patent that you was finally able to get done, right? Can you talk about your patent and the process for that, the frustrations and like all you had to go through for that?
Yeah, I mean, it started in 2018 is when I first did the provisional patent. And yeah, for me, it took 3 years from the time I started the provisional patent to the time I got awarded the patent. But that could have been faster based on how much how green my pockets were to throw at my patent attorney. So, it was basically like pay as you go. They would give me a cost. It was like a monthly payment thing to get it done. And so it was just this long process of starting that provisional patent, doing the paying for the initial patent search, because ideally you do a patent search on your own, see what you can find, and then that way you send it to the patent attorney. That way they have a list. Because the way I thought about it was, if I search patents on my own, I can just send them to my patent attorney, and I save him that time. He can just look through those patents, determine whether I can patent my idea or not. And he's like, "Oh, that's cool and all, and I'll look through those." But to look through patents, I can't remember what he would charge. I think it was like $100 per patent for him to look at. So he was like, "Hey, flat fee $1,000. I'll look through all, whatever I can find. I'll search the prior art on myself."
And how do you find your patent attorney? Did someone recommend it to you? Or you just did a Google search for patent attorneys and found the one you thought would be best for you?
Yeah, I did a lot of research on patent attorneys. It was quite a few months actually, because it's, for me, especially because I knew based on what I found on myself online that it was going to be a fine line that I'd have to walk. Based on what I found. I mean, there were patents by LG and Sony and like major companies that were kind of bordering on what I was wanting to do. So, I was like, man, I got to pay up, I should probably go to a better, I shouldn't shortchange myself and pay, for a bottom tier patent attorney for something that's going to be, where I myself found, patents that were similar. So I thought like, man, I just need to go to somebody that's one of the best. I did the research and I actually called 2 other patent attorneys. I think one was in Florida and one was in Texas. And I just decided like, you know what, I was like that self-doubt thing. Like, he's one of the best patent attorney. He's like he's a patent attorney to some of the sharks on Shark Tank. And so he's a nationally kind of known, probably even like world known patent attorney. And I, in that self-doubt, that's why I called the other patent attorneys at first. I'm like thinking, no, this guy's not going to work with me. He's probably going to be too expensive or whatever. And I just stabbed the anxiety in the face, and I sent him the email, and we got things kicked off, and it ended up being, relatively affordable compared to the other things. And the way he talked about it was, with my patent attorney, when you file the provisional patent, all that cost is going to get rolled towards the full utility patent. So he talks about how, basically it's like almost a no loss thing, right? So where he's putting in the work for the provisional patent, and if something goes wrong, then you can just kind of kill it there. Because with the provisional patent, you have 1 year from the time you file to the time you actually submit, something, you kind of give, I think that's how it works. You just kind of give the patent, the patent attorneys send like a notice saying like, hey, this is what we intend on doing. And within a year, they filed the provisional patent, and within a year of the provisional patent being filed, then they have that year to file the full patent. And so in that year, the entrepreneur has time to, have some protection, some level of protection on their idea, and be able to show it to people and determine whether or not, like, hey, in that year time, should I push it forward or not? So
what's the advantage? What the advantage of having a patent? Like, what do you get from patent? You get extra money, like what is the time and money you put into a patent actually worth it?
Well, it can all depend. For me, I saw it as a win-win because the way I saw it was as an engineering student, a lot of the jobs that I applied to asked the applicant, do you have any patents? Do you have a patent? And it's like, no, next question. And so when I wasn't getting any, interview opportunities for jobs or anything back, I thought, well, you know what? I have this idea from, being an engineering student, and in my mind, I thought I could get it done faster than a master's degree, right? Like it's obviously, it's cheaper than a master's degree, depending on the type of thing you want to patent. But for me, cheaper than a master's degree, I thought I could do it faster than a master's degree. And I was like, hey, cheaper and faster. That way I can get something else on my resume to get me to compete. Because a lot of the jobs are like, hey, bachelor's degree, but master's preferred. So I was like, man, I don't got time to go get a master's degree. I just get ready to do my bachelor's degree. And I got, a bunch of things going on.
So can you explain what actually does your patent do?
Oh, yeah. It's just basically I have the utility patent for convective heat transfer.
Raise it up a little bit.
Yeah. So convective heat transfer. So basically it's just a radiator. Phone cases are all plastic, right? And plastic's an insulator. So a full plastic case is essentially just baking your phone in an oven. So when I was an engineering student, I was like, man, if we can just replace a large portion of this insulating plastic with a metal plate, then it'll be a radiator and help the phone breathe. So that's basically all it is just replacing the insulating portion of the phone case and replacing it with something that's,
and can people buy that now?
Well, I have a Navy veteran that's helping me get these made. And man, this has been the biggest struggle for years, basically since I filed the provisional patent, 3 years, I've been trying to get plates made. And I've gone to like minting companies, military coin commemorative companies, jewelers, 3D printing companies. Like I've done it all and I've gotten different things. And, obviously I need something that's going to be cost effective for the consumer, not make $300 phone cases or something, so this Navy veteran, I finally, out of desperation, I just went to a CNC Facebook group and I was like, hey guys, I'm trying to get this done. It seems simple enough, right? I mean, an aluminum plate that's already, like factory, the thickness, right? They don't even got to mill the thickness down. It's literally the thickness of the factory plate. Just need to cut it and etch it up. And so yeah, the Navy veteran was like, hey, you're a vet. I think I can help you, And so he's been for like 6 months, 7 months now, trying to help me get it done. And part of that towards the end of last year was COVID, of course, like kind of wrecking his life. He was a federal employee and, he didn't want to get the jab. So he had to leave his job and find a new job. And then his parents got COVID and his grandma ended up hospitalized, not for COVID reasons. And, like I said, it's been a years long thing and he's a Navy vet with real life issues. So I'm like, I'm not even going to bother him. I was just like once a month I'd message him and ask him, hey man, how's your family doing? How's how things going? So when the new year kicked off and he's like, hey, people are getting better and, now we're getting some product out. But yeah, I think hopefully in the next month that I'll open my Shopify site. I do have a Shopify site.
What are you looking at the price point being for them?
For like the generic case itself, $50, $55 with shipping included. So yeah, around there. I'm trying to keep it, in the price range of OtterBox. And the thing for me that's hard now is I'm buying these cases at full price. So they'll run me anywhere from $10 to $25 alone. And then I take these in my garage and I make the cut myself. Yeah. And then the Navy veteran makes this cut and, we make it work.
Okay. Hey, quickly, can you tell a story? I think it's a great story where you were at a friend's house and he put his phone in the ice box. You're like, oh shit, you do that too?
Yeah, man. That's really what spurred me to and made me realize that, man, like I'm not the only one that has this problem. And so, I talked about senior engineering student, realized like, man, always sticking my phone up to the AC of the car, throwing it in the freezer. And I throw it in the freezer a lot of times in, 2 degrees. I'm going for 2 degrees, about to graduate. My wife working full time, 2 kids that are like 2 and 5, So the world's spinning crazy and my phone gets hot, it would bother me. So I'd throw it in the freezer. And a lot of times I'd just sit there for 20, 30 seconds because it's in the freezer, right? It doesn't need to sit there long. So I just kind of hang out by the freezer. But a lot of times, my attention gets pulled and I walk away. And then 30 minutes later, I'm like, damn, where did I put my phone down? Where? And then I'm like, oh, it's in the freezer. So I'd pull it out and it'd be off and frozen. And like, oh man, I hope it didn't, with the hot and the cold, it condenses. So I'm like, man, I hope I didn't create a bunch of moisture on the inside and kill my phone. And so one day I went over to my classmate's house to do, work on some chemistry homework. And as soon as I walked in, I sit down, start pulling the stuff out my bag, getting ready to study. And he's going crazy, over all over his apartment, like looking for his phone. He's like, "Where's my phone?" Oh yeah. And then he opens up his freezer and he pulls it out. I'm like, "What?" And my mind exploded. I was like, "What? You do that too?" I thought I was the only person in the world who put their phone in the freezer. So it was just like this really eye-opening moment of, man, I'm not the only person who has this problem or cares about this problem, right? Like there's other people putting their phones in the ice box or putting them where they're trying to cool them down.
So you're doing a lot of stuff. You're doing a lot of great things, but let's talk about imposter syndrome, which like everyone has. And like, I was reading this article earlier today and this blew me away. Like everyone has imposter syndrome. So Suni Lee, she won the gold medals in the Summer Olympics for all around gymnastics, right? She's at Auburn now, like great gymnastic. And she was talking about how after she won the gold medal, she had imposter syndrome because, of course, Simone Biles dropped out because of mental health. And so Suni was like, if she wouldn't have dropped out, I wouldn't have been the gold medalist. And I'm thinking, man, you won the freaking gold medal and like in the Olympics, gold all around best gymnast, and you have imposter syndrome. Like, what the fuck's going on, right? Yeah. Can you just talk about how that it tends like the story some people are right, even though you're succeeding, doing stuff great. I know so many people doing great things. They're always like, oh, it's luck or someone else could do it better. Like, no, actually, you're doing the work, you're doing the shit, but it's like this. Everyone suffers from it, right?
Yeah, it's really it's it's a demon we all battle, man. No matter what we do, no matter who we are. It's like you said, and even if she won the silver medal, like even if she would have become runner up, like man, that's still an incredible
second
feat.
best in the world, right?
Like, oh my goodness, like to be second place in the world at anything, like there's only one person better than you. It's not a thing to be frowned upon or to feel bad about. And it's funny because I don't know if you're familiar with the artist Daughtry. He's like a rocker.
Yeah.
And he's like, he always wins second in everything. He won second in
he on like American Idol or Voice
something like that. And then he came second on The Masked Singer. And it's funny because like,
I remember him on Masked Singer.
Yeah, so he's got a great voice. He's one of the few like modern day artists that I can tolerate listening to. And it's funny because I was reading through the YouTube comments and somebody was like, the second I knew, like I heard the voice, I knew it was Daughtry, and I knew he wasn't going to win because he gets second at everything he does. But he's super successful, has his following. It's like, who cares if you're second, right? Like that's the thing. But with the imposter syndrome, I think we all have it or you start to feel that way because in our minds, we shit on ourselves a lot, like we're our own worst critic.
We do.
Yeah. And so that's a big part of it. And so like you gave your example, and one example that really resonates with me is because I watch a lot of the UFC and fighters, and Justin Gaethje, he's competed for the championship, and he, when he was working his way up, he was winning fights, and he's like, man, like he would freak out after he would win. He's like, man, I'm winning these fights. It's like, I feel like I'm always going to go in there and get knocked out. I can't believe I'm winning. I can't believe I'm going to be like fight for a championship. He's talking about his imposter syndrome. And I'm like, whoa, like I would have never guessed Justin Gaethje, who seems very confident, goes in there and takes people's heads off, has imposter syndrome, and it's like when you get to those, those levels of competing with, world-class people, or like I said, just feeling like you're in a spot where maybe you grew up poor, disenfranchised.
I don't belong here.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. It's like we're our own worst critic, and a lot of times it's just because of where we originally started and grew up or came from.
I think a lot of people had those two voices: one saying you can do it, other one saying no, you can't, and they're always battling each other. And unfortunately, sometimes the voice says, "What the fuck you doing here?" Wins out, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's funny because I was telling my wife about that the other day, man, because I just think about it a lot. And for me, I'm pretty good about keeping outside voices out, like not caring about what other people think about me. And it's funny because I beat myself up enough, and I'm like, man, I'm thankful that I don't care about what anybody else thinks, because I beat myself up enough. Like if I cared about what other people else think, like, man, I'd be destroyed all the time. And so it's funny because then the next day I saw like something on social media that was like a quote similar like that, like, hey, don't beat yourself up because people do it for you, like it's kind of one of those things you just got to deal with.
Yeah, we all got to learn how to deal with it. So next, talk about growing up in Freer, Texas.
Yeah, it's just a small town, Freer, America is how they like to, Freer, Texas, America. We, it's just like 2,500, 2,000 people. I think we might be the biggest little town in the county. Yeah, I think we are. So yeah, the county, it's got 3 small towns.
This is like a South Texas, right?
Yeah.
Down past what's it called? Name town, Brownsville, the area, or Corpus Christi, or
Yeah, it's a little bit west of Corpus Christi.
Okay.
Yeah. Brownsville, it's north of Brownsville,
Okay.
but they're, relatively the same distance, depends if you want to go east or south, but yeah, it's a small town, tight knit community. And it was just, I grew up on a 120-acre ranch. So, I just grew up mostly. The only time I didn't live on the ranch was in junior high for 3 years for all of my grade school. So all of elementary, ranch, junior high in town, and then high school back at the ranch. And yeah, it was interesting growing up out there because, you really have nothing to do out there, other than whenever I was in high school already and we had DirecTV and Dish, like satellite TV. But yeah, in elementary school, it was like going to the antenna and, 3 channels, mostly static. So I mostly played video games, just went around the ranch shooting my 1 pump or 22 or something.
It's okay. What kind of ranch was this? Like actual cattle ranch or?
No, we never had any cattle on it, but we did, there was wildlife, we had a rabbit and now there's deer there. It's kind of weird because I feel like deer at this point in Texas is like an invasive species because growing up, I didn't have any deer on my ranch and now I have deer on my ranch. And when I was just there in December, I'm driving early in the morning with my dad to go, do the gun show and there and promote my book and phone case and stuff. And we were driving early in the morning and dozens and dozens and dozens of deer just like on the sides of the road from just driving, and just running back and forth. And I'm like, dang, these things are like getting to the point where they're just breeding them out of control. Cause obviously, these ranchers have been breeding them selectively for their antlers for a long time. And now it just feels like it's getting to a point where they're becoming more of an invasive species than anything.
Yeah. And then talk about how you got involved with the plants.
Yeah, growing up on the ranch, everyone could tell me about animals and, cottontail rabbit, and bobwhite quail, and, the javelinas or colored peccary and all these different animals. But no one could tell me about plants other than like mesquite trees or, like the very few, or like the prickly pear cactus, like the very common plants. But I was always wondering, like, this is grass, but what kind of grass? And these are trees, but what kind of trees? And these are, brush, but what kind of brush? And then in high school, there was a competition in Texas, and it's everywhere in a lot of states. It's FFA, Future Farmers of America. And so in our agriculture classes, there's a ag competition, an FFA competition called plant identification. And so on Fridays, my teacher would drive us around town showing us the plants. He'd take us to a convenience store first for a few minutes to grab some snacks, and he'd drive us around town showing us the plants.
And this guy, he actually became like one of your big mentors, right?
Yeah, he is the reason I graduated high school, because my freshman year, wasn't able to take these classes. So my freshman year, I was skipping school, failing classes. And I tried to play baseball my freshman year, but I failed out because, like I said, I just was doing what I wanted and skipping school. And then my sophomore year, I was basically on that same track. But I took this class, and on Fridays, like I said, he would take us to ID the plants, and I would just like be attached to his hip because I wanted to learn everything I could. It was like, literally, I've been waiting my whole life for this, and now he was teaching it to us. So I'd be attached at the hip to him, trying to soak it up, within a month, he realized like, yo, this kid's for real about it. And he told me about the competition. He's like, it's the hardest competition. Nobody likes to do it because it's so hard. You got to be able to identify hundreds of plants at any stage of growth. And I'm like, I don't care, sign me up. I want to learn. And yeah, so it was just me and then 2 other seniors. So me as a sophomore and 2 other seniors, and one was his son and the other was his son's best friend. So, they had been basically growing up around it and learned their whole life about the plants, and they knew so much. And that's what really motivated me. It was like, man, they knew so much about the plants. And I was like, man, I would just want to keep learning. So
did you have some kind of system to help you memorize stuff?
No. Well, in a sense, based on the plants themselves and the what's the word? The physical traits of the plants, like sedges. The stem of the sedge was a triangle. So sedges had edges, right? So there was these little things to help us kind of remember and memorize the plants.
And can you still identify like every plant there is pretty much?
These are just Texas range plants. So that was a, disappointing thing about the competition was we went to the state competition and we won. And normally when you win state competitions, you go to the national level and compete for the national competition. But the year we won state was the year that they stopped doing national competition for plant ID, because it's too hard to get students from all across the US to study one set of plants and make it fair for everybody. So they ended up dropping it. But I mean, I can still identify a fair amount of plants. I can probably, identify a couple dozen as opposed to hundreds whenever I was in grade school. But yeah.
It's been a while. Next, can you talk about what you and your wife are doing with the Snohomish County Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah. That has been quite the grind, because it took forever to get the tax exempt status. And, not long after she started it, she ended up getting hired on by a chamber of commerce, and they did talk to her about kind of merging them both and things like that. So those were things that, are still kind of up in the air. But for the meantime, it's kind of been with one of those things where life, is throwing us all kinds of ways. And like we were talking about earlier, me potentially moving back down. So that kind of.
And one thing I didn't know, Chamber of Commerce are actually nonprofits, right?
Yeah.
I think I told you last time, I just thought they were like underneath the Department of Commerce, like government agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know someone could just randomly open one up, right? I had no clue.
Yeah, it's weird how there's all kinds of these different designations that nonprofits fall under, and Chamber of Commerce. And I think it's weird how a lot of like businesses, like the Better Business Bureau is a nonprofit. So it's kind of weird to think that these nonprofit organizations are seem like businesses to a lot of people, unless like you dig.
Yeah, it's probably have so much influence on business and different things you do, right?
Yeah, and it's like probably, don't quote me on this, but I think the NRA is probably a nonprofit.
I've heard that before too.
I'm pretty sure the NRA is a nonprofit too. So yeah, a lot of weird kind of IRS codes, and they have lots of different designations for the way businesses can fall under and things they can do.
Next, are you still doing stuff with Omex Analytics?
Yeah,
that's the snake venom toxin.
Yeah. So with that, I actually talked to my co-founder about this recently. I've been so busy with the phone case stuff in my book and getting these actually out and available to the public over the last year or so. That the omic stuff, because really at our stage, we're working on still getting patient data that, basically patients who have been snake bitten and get their blood work and their data from, their hospital visits. And that's been a grind. It's not an easy thing to do. We actually reached out to the poison control. Poison control is actually one of the bigger anti-venom. Like if you get bit by a snake, you should contact poison control, which is kind of weird. Like if you call 911, they're going to call poison control to see where the nearest snake venom is and which hospitals have it. So yeah, it's kind of been this weird like learning process, but we all understand that, especially for a tech startup, what we're trying to do, it's going to take, years of kicking the stone down the road before it actually builds momentum on its own. And so it's just, I talked to my co-founder recently about, now that this stuff's getting behind me, I need to start like applying to more pitch competitions and like doing these more seed stage things to, get the feedback and put ourselves out there and, casually date these investors or whatever,
And what's the goal with this startup? Are you trying to have like toxins cheaply made, or like, are you trying to like decrease death rates, or what are you trying to do? Well,
because right now snake venom, when you get bit by a snake, and it does, if you do get envenomated, a lot of times you get bit, it's a dry bite, because the snakes just use the venom. They've evolved to use their venom just to break down their food to help them eat. So if you just like spook a snake and it bites you, like let's say you lift up a log that a snake's under and it just strikes you, there's a chance you didn't get hit with any venom because, like the snake just got spooked. It wasn't like thinking, oh, I'm going to hunt, I'm getting ready to eat, I need to work this venom and get ready to inject. And so for us, when people do get bit, they just get generic doses of anti-venom. And a vial of anti-venom can cost, it varies widely from hospital to hospital and state to state, I'm sure, but it can cost anywhere from, $1,500 on the low end to $10,000+ on the high end. And when you get bit, they're just going to hit you with like 10 bottles of anti-venom. They're just going to hit you with anti-venom and see how you react. And if you still keep swelling, they'll hit you with more. And until they see that swelling stop. And so it's just this very generic dose. It's basically like, it's not a precise science, it's just like, hey, just keep hitting them. And, there's a lot of, um, what's the word? There's a lot of reasons, I guess, is the easy word that they do that, right? Because they're just trying to save somebody's limb or life, right? So they're just trying to stop the venom from coursing through their body. And yeah, so what we're trying to do is get patient data so we can try to more specify the dose based on somebody's height, weight, medical history, whether they're diabetic or things like that. So that way, if we can save somebody from going from 25 doses on average of antivenom to 15, we're not only saving them money, but we have more antivenom now that's available for other people to use. And it's really important in like rural places around the world, right? Which is where the most of the snake bites happen. And it does happen here in the US.
Yeah, but many snake bites happen in downtown Dallas, right?
Yeah,
you
yeah.
probably, in the rural areas.
Yeah. So especially as people kind of move out into, away from the city and move into the suburbs, like you're going to start encroaching into those lands of being with the animals. And so, yeah, so it's happening more and more. And it happens, obviously in third world countries exponentially more. So, but that's why it's important to, it's hard enough to get antivenom in those places because it has to be refrigerated. And that's another thing that, my co-founder has been talking about and potentially creating a temperature stable antivenom to where you don't have to refrigerate at such a, it's kind of like the COVID vaccine, right? How they have to keep it super refrigerated and shipped all across the country. So it was like this big logistical headache. And so I like to keep the logistical headache out of snake venom and people in third world countries who don't maybe have those refrigerators and those resources to, try to make things better for them.
So Ricardo, obviously someone sees a rattlesnake, they know it's poisonous. They see a king cobra, they know it's poisonous. But how can you tell how can you tell if a snake is venomous if you don't recognize it?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if there's a real way that you can specifically just like tell by looking at it from a distance. It's almost like the coral snake, and it's like what is it, the Carter snake or something?
Yeah.
They're like, camouflage to almost be the same.
Yeah,
but
coral snake ain't no joke.
Yeah, I would say you're better off just running. Just better off going the other way, avoiding them like the plague.
Yeah, coral snake. Was it water moccasin?
Or a moccasin? Yeah. Those things are. I actually just watched Veritasium. I like to watch Veritasium on YouTube. It's like a science channel. And he just went to in Australia. They have like a serpentarium or whatever, like where they have a snake husbandry and they milk the snakes for their venom to make antivenom, and it's just remarkable the things they do there. And they talk about how what was it? It's a snake from Australia. It's like the most venomous snake on earth, and the guy just talked about how he just got scratched, right? Like the snake didn't even bite him. It just scratched him and he ended up in the ICU for like 8 days or something. I'm like, geez, that's so crazy. It's enough venom in one bite to kill like 10,000 humans or something crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So you're doing a lot of entrepreneurship stuff. Now,
trying to.
Well, imposter syndrome, you're doing it. So, but you actually also got a master's in science from the entrepreneurship program from High School of Business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, talk about this. Some people will say, how can you study to be an entrepreneur, right? It's like, you can't study to be a swimmer. You just go do it, right?
Yeah, that's the way I
talk about why you decided to get a degree in entrepreneurship and what benefits you got out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it really just, for the way I think about it, is it's basically a crash course MBA, because the MBA students go for 2 years and our program is a year long. But we do get other things that are more geared towards entrepreneurship, like entrepreneurship strategy and marketing for entrepreneur, like marketing for startups kind of thing. So obviously marketing as a startup is different for corporations who have giant budgets and can pay for giant marketing teams. So, a lot of the curriculum is geared towards more of the startup world. But for the most part, we're just getting classes in finance, accounting, marketing, negotiations, leadership. So basically it's just the run of the mill, getting run through business school classes and learning about business in general. And then, like I said, those few classes, they are tailored more towards entrepreneurship and startup and the lean startup method and MVP, minimal viable product, and coming up with like these cheaper, better ways to go about starting your business.
I guess you were able to make a lot of good connections, networking with different investors, other entrepreneurs in the Seattle, Washington community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was, that's one of the beautiful things about the program. Was a big part of it was going around to the local businesses, the local startups, and hearing their stories and getting the tour of their companies and stuff like that. So, it's just, and then of course guests coming over too and now, not only did we get to go out and visit other businesses, but we had remarkable guests come tell us and come talk to us in the classroom about their stories and how they started their businesses.
And you're doing this not like you're just doing this by yourself. You're just doing this in addition to other stuff you're doing, right?
In terms of going to school, or?
Yeah, going to school. You're doing your startup stuff, your phone case.
Yeah, because that's part of the program is like, instead of for a normal master's thesis that you'd have to like do and spend, time on, we had to put together a business plan and compete, or apply to this business competition. So yeah, it's just it's a lot different in sense of a normal like for me going to graduate school to get my Ph.D. It's not like this dissertation that I'm going to have to defend or things like that. It's a little bit different. So that's what's cool about it. It's a unique experience, I'd say. And that's why, I've had a lot of people reach out to me like, should I do an MBA or should I do the entrepreneurship program? And it's like, well, how much time do you like, what's your ultimate goal, right? Do you want to just go to business school to learn business and try to work at Amazon? Or do you want to actually try to start your own company and learn about those things? And you can learn. I mean, there are people who do the MBA program who come out and decide like, hey, we're just going to start our own business. So not to say that you have to like go work at Amazon or Microsoft or anything, of course, but yeah, it's just one of those things. It's where a lot of the MBA students might go in there thinking that's what they want, and then they put together their business plan at the end of their MBA course. And it's really cool because one of the guest speakers that we had in the entrepreneurship program, he was an MBA student there. And he talked about how when him and his two partners for their final project of their MBA, they had to put a business plan together and like make this business, right, to graduate with their MBA. So they did it, and they're like, man, this is a great business plan. Like, we think we can make this work. So each guy put up 30,000, 33,000, with the three of them together, just out of the gate, had 100,000 to run with. And they're still going to this day. So it's like, man, how cool is that to go to business school and graduate and just start your own business, right? As an MBA student. And
so the people that graduate with you, like how many like actually started a company? How many decided to do some different things? How did that break down?
Yeah, I mean, it varies because some people go through and they're just associated with companies. Like one of my classmates, his dad started the business. So his dad had the patents, and his dad was like the scientist, you could say. And he was the businessman, right? So dad was doing the science and doing the patents and doing the patient studies or whatever. And he was hustling at business school, making the connections, making the network, learning about investment and this and this and that. And so you have like students like him who didn't start the business, but have a business. And then you have people like me and others who founded and are trying to kick our own businesses off. So it's a whole spectrum of people. Some of them didn't have a business at all or weren't associated with the business. They just had an idea that they wanted to try to turn into a business. And actually there was a student before my cohort where she met people in the program and kind of like fell onto their team, and she used their business to go through the program. So yeah, it's a wide spectrum of entrepreneurs that go through there.
So you have a lot of passion, a lot of things you're working on. Next, talk about your how you became your path and journey to become a research scientist, like how you got a degree in chemistry, and now you do some really big things as a research scientist at the University of Washington. Talk about the whole journey.
Yeah, well, this is a bit crazy on this one. I have to sit up a little bit. Oh man, yeah, because this has been my biggest imposter syndrome I think ever, in terms of because I've been battling imposter syndrome for a year being a scientist, and it got me thinking about when I was in the military. Like, did I ever have imposter syndrome in the military? Because I always felt like I was super confident in the military, right? They kind of train you to be like that. They don't train you to feel like you don't belong, because then we'd have a pretty crappy military, right? We train everybody to feel like they're confident in their job to go and fight. And so I had to do a lot of deep thinking, and I ended up kind of remembering times when I did serve where I felt like, hey, I don't belong. This is really weird. But yeah, so for my scientist stuff, so I graduated in 2016 with my degrees. I had already had 3 years of chemistry research that I had done as an undergrad, and then a year of environmental engineering research as I did as a senior. And that was like through a scholarship and stuff. But so I already had a bunch of research as an undergraduate in science labs. So, technically, I feel like that point I was pretty much a scientist, right? I had publications, had done ACS conventions and poster presentations and all kinds of stuff. But you know, you never really feel like a scientist. It's like one of these weird things. And so yeah, I graduated in 2016 with my degrees and a bunch of research under my belt. Because for me, like a lot of engineering students go and do internships. And for me, I didn't have that possibility because I had kids, a wife, and my GI Bill. Like going to school over the summer was going to pay me more than doing some internship away from my family. And so because of the GI Bill paying me, I was like, man, I'm better off doing research, staying home, taking classes over the summer, doing research over the summer, and just, you know, going forward like that. So when I graduated, I had a whole bunch of research, and then I couldn't get a job. And I'm like, damn, this sucks. Like, you know, applying, you know, first we moved up here and I'm applying in the area, Seattle area, can't get a job. So I'm applying a little bit further out, you know, Washington State. And after months roll by, couldn't get a job. So I applied all over the country and still couldn't get a job. And, you know, got really depressed, and my wife ended up, you know, saving us, got her job at Amazon. So while I was applying for those jobs, and I couldn't, you know, the way I thought about it was like, because, you know, UW obviously has tons of science jobs. So I was applying for a whole bunch that I qualified for, and I wasn't even getting a chance to interview. So I'm like, damn, you know what? I'm just going to call their temp. I'm going to go through their temp agency, UW temp, and I'll do whatever they make me do. I'll be a custodian, like whatever jobs they have, I'll take. So my first job with them was a custodian for like 2 or 3 weeks, where I was just scrubbing floors, wiping walls, like whatever. And in my mind, I was like, yo, like I'm just going to do enough temp jobs where I'll get my foot in the door of a lab eventually and I'll get in. And so, yeah, that first job, I was, you know, doing janitorial stuff for about 3 weeks. And then the next temp job, I worked at transportation services, which is basically like doing janitorial work on the cars, right? I was cleaning the cars out, vacuuming the cars, fueling them up, and just kind of, you know, like run of the mill vehicle maintenance. No, we're like not maintenance, but because they have the maintenance bay where the actual mechanics work, but just like, cause it's like glorified brown bear. You know what I'm saying? Like just driving around, taking care of making sure they're
Hey,
clean.
Ricardo, real quick, can you talk about your mindset? Because I think a lot of people have the attitude nowadays, like, you know, I'm a chemist, I'm a scientist. This is below me, this is beneath me, right? Can you just talk about the mindset you had? Like, you know, you had it, of course, I'm sure your family and kids motivated you to do this stuff too, but talk about the mindset, like, you know, I'm gonna do whatever's necessary to put me and set me up for success.
Yeah. So, you know, that's the way I've always thought about it, was like, yeah, I have these degrees in this research, but I mean, I'm not below doing what I got to do to get my foot in the door, you know? So yeah, you know, I feel like that's a lot of how people feel these days, in terms of their job. Like, man, I love janitors. Like, I don't know how people feel about, you know, but I know they're like always kind of shunned and looked down upon by a lot of society, but man, without them, like shit would be dirty, you know, like they take care of us, you know? And so that's why I don't mind, man. We got to get the stuff. And whenever I was in the lab, I'm like cleaning stuff up all the time, making sure the lab's clean. But yeah, so, you know, it's just one of those things where I'm not, you know, below any job, because all these jobs are important and we all got a job to do to make things happen and get stuff done at the end of the day. So, but I think that's a thing that a lot of people fall into, is like, yeah, they get their degrees and they feel like, yeah, now I shouldn't have to take out the trash because I have a degree now. And it's so funny because whenever I was at work, when I'm taking like bins down, like trash bins down to the trash to take them out myself, because one of my coworkers asked me to do it. And so one of the other scientists saw me taking bins down, like in the elevator. She's like, "You take the trash down?" I'm like, "Yeah, why not?" Like I got asked to do it, and I'm trying to help my coworkers out, so I'm going to take the trash down. And so yeah, it's just one of those mentalities where, you know, I don't I don't get it. You know, like I don't get why people think if they have money or status or power, like, man, there's no one's above cleaning stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like clean. Everybody should be cleaning their room. Every, you know, not like Jordan Peterson, maybe, you know, like dress right, dress everything. But
So you're doing the temp jobs, and how does that parlay into like doing the real stuff you want to do?
yeah, so I was doing those temp jobs, and like I said, the first one was custodial. Second one was basically custodial for vehicles. The third one was third one. Trying to think of if the surplus came first or not. Yeah, I think it was just those two. And then my wife got the job at Amazon. So then I, you know, stopped trying to get these jobs. And then a year later, she left her job at Amazon. I'm like, oh, who knows how long it's going to be before you find work again, or before I find work. So I just hopped back into UW temp, and I ended up, my first job back was working with UW surplus. And UW Surplus just goes around the campus to pick up stuff that they're going to surplus to sell online and just make a little bit money off of, and put that money back towards something else. So for about 2 weeks, I felt bad because my wife got a job pretty quick. Like in our mind, we don't know how long it's going to be before we get another job, right? So I hopped into this temp work and did all the training. And then like right after I got done training, I'm like, I'm sorry guys, but my wife got a job. Like I got to go. And but yeah, so it was basically like nothing custodial, but I was just going around like a mover, right? I got promoted from from a janitor to a mover. And then yeah, so then my wife got a job again, and I just went back to being stay-at-home dad. Then everything happened with my book, my patent, COVID, and actually the master's degree, and then COVID hit. And after I graduated in 2020, I graduated Foster Business School, and I'm applying back at labs. So like, man, I just want to get back in the lab. I want my PhD. I need to get experience under my belt so I can get into a PhD program. So I'm applying to labs, and still no love. So I was like, oh, UW temp. Let me go back to UW temp. Maybe they can help me get in the lab. So I went back to them, and they're like, no, we don't have any lab jobs, but we do have this freshman application processor job that you can do remote from home. And it's a 3-month gig. So I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound too bad. I was making like $22 an hour remote from home. And so, it was so sucking because like, man, I can't work behind a computer 8 hours a day, like it was hard. But, I did that for 3 months, all of November, all of December, and all of January, I want to say. Yeah. All of November, all of December, all of January. And so for 3 months, man, every day, 8 hours a day, just going through freshman applications and making sure they had all their classes taken that they needed to, whatever. And then when it was all said and done, temp came to me, and they were like, hey, Ricardo, with your degrees and your experience and your military, whatever, we feel like you'd be a good fit for this job. And it's a job helping a project called the Waves. It's the Waves survey project by Lab Medicine. And, basically he said that, they're testing for people for COVID across the state. You're going to be the logistics guy helping ship stuff across the state. You're going to have to, figure that stuff out. Do you think you can do it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So they set up the interview, and man, it was so crazy because when I did the interview, they're telling me about the job. So, my boss at the time, she was telling me like, yeah, you're going to have to send stuff across the state. You're going to have to receive pallets and palletize stuff and send it out. And I'm like, wait, I'm gonna have to like make pallets of things and wrap them. She's like, yeah. I was like, wow, I literally used to do that as a night stalker at a grocery store before I joined the Army at HEB. I used to be a night stalker at HEB. So she's like literally describing to me stuff that I was like, oh, I'm a master palletizer. And like, I can make pallets like, like no one's business because I'm good at Tetris. I can see how, I'm good at spatial awareness type stuff. So I can make it work. And so like that really, I think, sealed the deal. And like, not only did I, able to do it, but I had this experience palletizing stuff. And for her, she just felt better because it's a lot of medical stuff. So she's like, yo, I don't want to hire somebody, and you're familiar with lab equipment. So she's like, yo, I don't want to tell you something, and hey, go grab the centrifuge. And then someone else be like, what's a centrifuge? Or what's a, pipettes or something, like just go grab these things.
Yeah, you knew the language.
Yeah. So that's what a big part of why she wanted me to is like, based on your research, you have research experience, you have military experience, and, it just seemed like you'd be a good fit. So I did that for about 6 weeks. And while I was there at Lab Med, virology is there where I was working. And so I just started networking with the people there. And one of the ladies in charge, I was talking to her about how I have a VA appointment. I was like, man, I got a VA appointment. I hate going to the VA. Like, I call them the morgue prep facility, man. They're just getting you ready for the morgue. They're not trying to help you most of the time. It's my experience anyway. I know people were like, oh, VA is great. But so yeah, I'm like, oh, I got to go deal with the VA. And she's like, well, UW's got great benefits. You should look at job openings here, and you get a job here, you can get some good VA or good UW benefits. So I was like, okay. So that night I went home and I just looked at virology and what they had, and there was research scientist positions available. So I'm like,
you had no clue, did you?
Yeah, I had no clue. I was like, wow. So research scientist one, entry-level research scientist positions. And so I went back to her the next day and I was like, hey, remember how you said to go apply? I was like, well, I looked at these research scientist positions and I'm going to apply one. She's like, you qualify for those? I was like, yeah. She's like, okay, apply. So I did. And, basically that's what helped me get the interview with my boss, right? Like my boss now, whenever I was like just brand new and had to do the interview with her in person, I just begged her. I just begged her. I was like, look, I know it's been 5 years since I've been in a lab. I know I've never worked in a lab like this. And, I don't have any research experience that's relevant to this, but, I'm a fast learner. I'll work hard. And I don't care if it's full time, part time, volunteer, like whatever capacity you want to let me in, just please let me in, just there begging her. And yeah, she ended up giving me the job, obviously. And within a few weeks, it was kind of crazy because, I got the job. And at first I was training to do, one thing. And then there was this guy who on the NGS team, which is where I'm on now, the next generation sequencing team, he was getting ready to go on vacation for a week. So I was like, this fresh hire. And they're like, yo, just shadow this guy for a week. He's going to train you because next week he's getting ready to go. And we want you to be able to cover for him. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I shadowed him for a week. He was gone. Everything went well. He comes back and I'm basically like looped in. That's how I got looped into the NGS team, because I was just this kind of wanderer on, in virology, right? This research scientist new hire with no experience, just kind of floating, picking up little experience where I could here and there, learning what I could. And then they're like, yo, this guy's going on vacation. You need to learn what he does and cover for him. And that's how I ended up on the NGS team, because the guy going on vacation was on the NGS team. And so, yeah, I covered for him, and that's where I've been ever since. And, it's crazy because within 2 months, because I worked during the day for about 8 months. And then for like the past 3 or 4 months, I've been working the evenings. But when I was working in the day, I was working the end of the pipeline, creating what's called libraries and loading the sequencers to sequence, for the different variants of COVID or whatever other viruses we're feeding them. And so after about 2 months, 2 or 3 months, the packet of paperwork ended up on my desk for like all the paperwork that gets done for all this, what we were doing to keep track of. And in my mind, I was thinking like, man, they just put it on my desk because my boss doesn't have any room on her desk, And so I'm just like, oh, still just flying blind, doing my thing, making sure everything's running smooth. And for months, the entire time I was working days, things were super smooth. Everybody's happy. It's like the greatest thing ever. And then I shift to nights, and it was a perfect storm of shit, really, is what it was. We got new hires, and anytime you get new hires, like things are not going to go perfect, right? We're going to have failed plates. The QC is going to fail sometimes, right? Because we have new hires who are going to, make their mistakes. So it was a perfect storm of new hires coming in, 3 of them, which was like the biggest kind of hiring, like maybe even 4 of them, 3 or 4 of them. So a bunch of new hires, me moving to evenings, machines breaking, logistical, shipping, like we were running out of chemical. You know how the shipping towards the end of the year was like, and getting anything was a pain. So like all these chemical reagents we're waiting for on back order, and like just all this headache. And then at that point I realized like they were getting me in trouble. They're getting mad at me. And I'm like, why are you getting mad at me? I'm nobody. I've none of this experience. And then I realized like, man, I was kind of in charge of, so when we sequence for COVID, specifically for COVID, when we sequence, there are 2 pipelines. There is a surveillance pipeline where like it's just like mass testing sites where people go through those drive-through testing sites. And then there's the clinical side where people go to the doctor swabs them and lets them know, hey, you have COVID. And so I was in charge of the surveillance pipeline, and my coworker that I had covered for that week, he was in charge of the study samples like Pfizer, Janssen, and all these other study samples we're getting. Excuse me. And so he was in charge of those, the study samples and the clinical samples, and I was in charge of the surveillance samples. And so, yeah, I'm just doing my job, like running these surveillance samples, feeding the sequencer. And then when I moved to nights and things fell apart, like not because of me, not because I was, not that I had it propped up on my shoulder. I'm not trying to make it seem like that. But when I moved to nights, because of the perfect storm I talked about before, things started to fall apart. And I started to get in trouble. I'm like, wait a minute, why are you getting me in trouble? Like, I want to do the work, but my machine's broken. Like, I want to do the work, but I'm out of chemicals. Like, I don't, like, believe me, I'm frustrated too. And then I realized like, man, I was leading the surveillance side of that. Like in my mind, I was never leading it. I was just helping it and like, riding along, right? Just like riding along for the ride. But I was leading that for a long time, and I didn't even realize it until I moved to nights. I'm like, oh, damn. Like, had I known I was, whenever I was working days, I thought I was riding passenger. I'm just like, buffing the car, keeping it a little bit clean, making sure it's fueled up. But had I known I was driving it, man, the thing would have been detailed, like it would have been a lot different. So it was this kind of weird realization, like, man, I hadn't been in a lab in 5 years, and they just kind of handed me the keys to this $1 million sequencer, like, just take care of it.
So Ricardo, let's go back to the research scientists, but first let's go back to their mindset, right? Let's talk about veteran mindset when they get out of the Army. I think a lot of veterans too, they're like, I'm a veteran, I was in the Army, Navy, I shouldn't have to do these type of jobs, right? They think they're better because, I served in Afghanistan, Iraq, where the case may be. And then a lot of senior ranking military officials are like, I was a sergeant major, I was an E7, I did this Army, I should do the same thing in the civilian world. Talk about, well, maybe your skills match up, but it's like, you're not going to work at Amazon for 10 years and go to the Army, become a lieutenant colonel, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk about how veterans kind of get their mindset wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big reason why I try to avoid working for the federal government, because I know a lot of ex-military work for the federal government. So I'm like, man, I really don't want to have that environment at work where some guy just feels like he was a retired, major, you know what I'm saying? Like, man, like, that's past life. Don't try to bring that here now. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just one of those things. And I also feel it all depends, like, on your job too, right? Like, if you were a military intelligence officer who, never really had to grind as a, in the grunt ways, like the way we grind. And then when you get out, you just feel extra, I wouldn't say entitled, but just like if I was an infantry officer and I got out and somebody asked me to do some grimy, dirty crap, like clean stuff up and whatever, I'd be like, okay, I was sleeping in dirt anyway. But as opposed to maybe MI, who maybe had a little bit of a bougier experience or something, and they'd be like, man, I didn't even do that in the military. What makes you think I'm going to do that now? So I don't know. It's hard to psychologically diagnose, people like that in terms of how they're going to think about it. But it's, a lot of things in terms of what they did in the past. And, like I said, I feel like if you're a combat arms and you went overseas, like like,
you step in dirt, you step in dirt,
yeah.
no tents, just on prayer ground and getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night and freezing cold.
Yeah. I just, on my Facebook page, I just share a bunch of like science and, science videos or information and quotes and stuff. And one of the things on my memories recently was, and it was kind of ironic how I came across it, because it was, at the time, it was from like 2020, the COVID scare, people buying up all the toilet paper, right? And it was literally, I don't know if it's a poem or just like a short saying or something, but it was from a soldier in World War I. And it was just talking about how, like, they're in the trenches and they need to use the restroom, but they know if they come out the trench, they're going to die. So they're like in there just crapping in their hands and throwing it out. And just like, oh my goodness, like those, like
what's the saying? You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I'm saying, like, those guys, had they survived the war, got out and got into the civilian world, like, maybe some of them might, maybe half of them would be like, man, I'm not going to take shit out ever again. I lived in this shit, like. And that's the way I felt about picking up after, like, cigarette butts. Like, man, I'm not a cigarette smoker. I'm not going to pick up cigarette butts, like, make the cigarette smokers do that, but like now, if it's my sidewalk or my community, it's a different mentality when you're a 20-year-old kid and, you're being forced by some sergeant to police call the parking lot. And, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'll pick up the paper, but you cigarette smokers pick up after yourself.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break, right? All right.
Yeah, sounds good.
We got to use the bathroom real fast.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Right. Or else, if you want to, can you, while I'm gone, talk about how you join the Army, sniper school, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I'll talk about sniper school. Okay. All right. So, or my journey to being a sniper, I guess, would be a quick, fun story. So I started out as a 240 machine gunner in a brand new unit, 5th Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division. And when I first got there, no vehicles, no weapons, no buildings, no anything. And so as the months rolled by, they're putting us in platoons and battalions and, military units. And, as the months roll by, we get vehicles, weapons, gear, and stuff to train with. And I started out as a 240 machine gunner, which kind of, hurt my heart a little bit, because I grew up on a ranch, like I talked about earlier, and shooting rifles my whole life. So I felt like that was going to be the way I could best contribute. So when they put a machine gun in my hands, especially the 30-pound empty 240 hog, I was like, man, this thing weighs like an eighth of what I do, or a sixth of what I do. Like, I'm not very big, and lots of other big guys here. So so it was kind of like, it hurt my heart a little bit, but you get a machine gun and you take it to a range and you start to fire that fully automatic death machine. It makes you kind of happy. So I got over it pretty quick. And so, just started as a machine gunner. And one morning they asked, it was a brand new unit. So we had spots to fill. They asked who wants to try out for the sniper team. And I raised my hand and went through a 65-hour tryout and got selected as one of 3 guys out of like maybe 15 or so who tried out. And after that, not long after that, which is, writing my book kind of made me realize like how fast all these events happened back to back, because in my mind, there was like, 3 to 6 months gap between some of the stuff. And so not long after making the sniper team, I got sent to main post to learn how to be a sniper. And that was a 3-week course. And that was another thing that was an interesting insight from my book. Was I thought in my mind it was at least 4 weeks. And it just ended up being 3 weeks. But I asked my old sniper buddy recently, I was like, yo, man, how long? Because like I have my certificate from graduating and it does show dates. It's about 3 weeks. And I'm like, man, was it this long? And he's like, yeah, it was 3 weeks long, but we also worked on Saturdays. And so I'm like, oh man, no wonder why it felt 4 weeks long, because it was 3 weeks long, but we worked on Saturdays. So it was basically 4 weeks long.
So quick lesson, never drink a Modelo and a Coke right before you do a podcast.
No, you're good, man. So I just talked about how, how I started out, no weapons, and brand new unit, 240 gunner, tried out for the sniper team, made the sniper team. And then within like, I just talked about how an interesting insight in writing my book was, in my mind, from when I made the sniper team and I learned how to be a sniper, there was like a 3-month gap in my mind from me making the sniper team and going to that initial school. And then when I wrote my book, it was literally like back to back. I made the sniper team and like a week or 2 later, they sent me to the school. And I'm like, damn. Like,
and you had experience shooting, from your days in Texas Ranch, and like you just.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it wasn't being a sniper, like one of your childhood dreams too.
Yeah, being a sniper, an astronaut, and a fighter pilot. Those are like my elementary level dreams. And then, of course, as you grow up, our dreams die. And then at that point, everybody tells you, well, choose a career, right? When you're young, they're dreams. When you're in junior high, it's career. And then when you're in high school, it's all dead.
That's such bad advice, right? You tell people like, in 10th grade, 9th grade, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm. Like,
give people options, let them explore, like do different things, right? Let them like pick 10 things, because you never know you're gonna be good at until you do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I got thrown into learning how to be the sniper. And in my mind, it was a long 4-week course, because sniper school, when I went, was 5 weeks.
It was that at here at JBLM? You had to go somewhere else?
No, I went to Fort Benning for sniper school. And so when I went, it was 5 weeks. It might be like 6 or 7 weeks now, because they made it longer not long after I went through, because they were implementing a whole new sniper system. So they had to, get more time in sniper school to train the students on this new sniper system.
And sniper school, do you just use one weapon, or you have to use various weapons?
Yeah. We do pistol call. We shoot a pistol, and we have to do pistol call in sniper school. And then we shoot the Barrett. And then for the rifles, you do day and night shoots. So I don't think we do a Barrett night shoot, though. I mean, like I said, it could have changed by now, because I know they do a lot of different crazy things now. And so yeah, it's mostly Barrett range, bolt action, M24 range, pistol shooting. I don't think they had the new sniper weapon system yet whenever I went through sniper school. Or if they did, they were just like showing it to us a little bit. They were like, we're not going to give you the full run through, because it was like a class or 2 later that they did implement it. And then by the end of the year, they're like, yeah, this is too cramped.
I don't guess you have to be expert on every weapon, right? You can't be like.
Yeah, you have to qualify expert in order to go. But of course, if your unit wants to send you, they'll send you to the range with 200 rounds of ammo until you qualify expert.
Yeah, everyone will qualify.
Yeah, exactly. So then, did that pre-sniper training for 3 weeks, and that was hell on earth. In my mind, it was 4 weeks long because we ran every day, but it was 3 weeks, but we worked on Saturdays. So that's why it just felt so long. But yeah, normally in the military, it's one day muscle failure, next day, cardio, muscle failure, cardio, you alternate. And man, not in that school. It was just all run us to, I think they were just trying to get dudes to quit, honestly. And there was one guy who did quit. And, but yeah, man, they just ran us into the run around the airfield, run hills, run just, the most horrific. And I wanted to quit too. I was like, I'd always think about it like, man, fuck desk. Like I just want to quit. But of
Yeah,
course I
yeah,
wasn't gonna
yeah.
quit.
I did OCS at Fort Benning. Yeah, it was no joke.
So yeah, it was tough. And that was just the pre-sniper stuff. And then when you go to real sniper school, I don't know how it is now, but when I went, it was like I said, only 5 weeks. And they try to bust you off for like the first 3 or 4 days. They make you do PT and try to get the guys who are going to quit to quit. And then they're like, okay, guys, we don't have time to smoke you. Like we want to try to break y'all all off, but we don't have time where we have to train y'all about the real sniper stuff. So I hope if they made it longer, they added some extra time to try to smoke dudes and break them off. Cause like any military combat school, it's an important part of weeding the people out who don't want to be there. And I mean, sniper school, even without that, has a 50% attrition rate. So like the stalk week where you got to spend the whole week, ghillie suiting up and going and hunting the cadre down. That's really what gets most guys.
And being a sniper, I guess, has to be lonely, right? Because you're either on a mission all by yourself pretty much. And
yeah, you are your small element, your spotter and security or your shooter and your security or your shooter and spotter, at most 3, ideally, because the bigger the team gets, the more you have to be accountable. Because as a sniper team, if you have a security element with you, we always felt, I don't know what the SOP is, but we always felt like, they're attached to us. They're our security. We're responsible for them. So we always try to keep it to ourselves or a small security team because we don't want a whole bunch of people attached to us and be responsible for a whole bunch of dudes,
Yeah, yeah. And so how long were you a sniper?
Pretty much my whole military career. I started out as a 240 gunner early on, and then I made the sniper team in 2017. I want to say it was early 2017 when I made the sniper team. And then I went to sniper, 2017, 2007. I'm sorry. I've been doing that lately, adding decades to my stories. But yeah, I think it was like 2007 when I made the sniper team. And then I went to sniper school in early 2008 and deployed in 2009.
And do you still shoot?
Not as much as I'd like. When I was in Texas in December, I did do a little bit of blasting, but for me, I don't like to shoot. I don't like indoor ranges, and it's hard to find an outdoor range out around here.
Yeah,
and I like to shoot distance.
I know they have a couple down in Fort Lewis. That's kind of too far for you to go.
Yeah, yeah, and I like to shoot at least 300 meters. Because even with the little M4, like that's a decent little shot with an M4 300, but with a bolt action, of course, 500 minimum would be ideal.
You have a favorite weapon to shoot?
I'd really just like the bolt action Remington 700. It's just kind of what I grew up shooting and what I'm comfortable with. So it's a very good sniper system because it's light and it's effective. Like it's a good weapon. So, it's just something I'm comfortable with. It's funny because growing up, my dad would always tell me, son, this is a sniper rifle. I'm like, Dad, shut up. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then when I made the sniper team, the first gun they handed me was the same gun I'd been shooting my whole life. I'm like, damn, Dad was right.
So are you going to teach your kids to shoot? Or have you already taught them how to shoot?
Yeah. Last time we went down to Texas as a family, I did give my oldest daughter some trigger time. My youngest was too young at the time. But yeah, I'm going to teach them to shoot. And
do you do any hunting?
Down there I do, not so much around here because hunting up here is weird. It's one of those things that I learned, like, I'm sure because a lot of the land is obviously, private land, and then you have to try to hit public land or get leases or whatever. And the lottery system, like to hunt any of the cool game here, and it's a lottery system. So it's, it seems too complicated for me to even want to bother with. And especially for someone like me who doesn't have all the time and to kind of research and, because it seems like it's a lot of work. I mean, I'm a part of the hunting groups on Facebook. So I always see these guys talking about like, trying to just go out to scout locations because they're like, not only when you sign up for this game, you have to sign up for certain locations. Like I think they're like GMUs or something. So yeah, it's a different world over here compared to Texas where you can just go buy a white-tailed deer license and go blast something, whether it's in your property or a buddy's property. And the beautiful thing about Texas is like you can have a little 10-acre spot because in Texas you just need 10 acres to legally shoot. So what a lot of my people around where I grew up have, they just have like small plots, 10, 20 acres, and then you can just go hunt on that because as long as it's not high fence, the deer are just going to wander around. So you really don't need a huge ranch down there to actually get deer on your land. You just need to make sure you're not surrounded by high fence because then you will, won't have any deer on your land if they don't start there. If you're all high fenced off. And that's one thing that I think why we have deer on my property now, because our fence and along the highway isn't high fenced off. So deer can willy-nilly jump in and out of my property. And so, yeah, like the other, I want to say one of the sides is high fence. I think only one of the three sides is high fence. So most of my property isn't high fence, which is why we're getting deer on our property now, like 8-point bucks. And like, damn, I couldn't even imagine a spike or a doe. Like now we have 8-point bucks on my property. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. So I just thought of this funny story. It was someone said to me a long time ago, right? And so it was a radio show, and this lady called in, and they're talking about, I think it was in Minnesota, right? How all these deer will get hit on the highway, right? They can get hit on the highway.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady called in, well, I don't understand why is there a sign that says deer crossing here? Like, if we would simply move this deer crossing sign, there would be no deer crossing here, and they will live. And they're like flabbergasted, like, I don't understand. Can you say that again, ma'am? Yes. You know, all these deers are getting killed on the highway because it says right there, deer crossing, and the deer are crossing here. The deer crossing sign is. It's like, are you serious, ma'am? Like, do you hear what you're hearing? What you're saying right now? And she's like, yeah, you know, the government or state, whoever's in charge of the sign needs to move the deer crossing sign. So you're saying the deer are reading the sign and crossing right here. Yeah. I mean, that's the signs there, right? So they can tell the deer where to cross that. And I always remember the story. And I think about deer, right? Like, did this lady really believe this? Like, and of course, it had to be a coincidence that there's a lot of deer getting killed crossing this area, right? But it was because it's for the cars to slow down. Of course, the cars won't slow them down. Just everyone driving the deer, right?
Well, it's like I was telling you before. You know, it was like that driving in December with my dad when I was in Texas. Like, man, like you're driving and every mile it seemed like deer were running across the road. I'm like, man, it was never like this growing up. Like, yeah, there was the deer here and there. Occasionally you'd see them on the sides of the road, but now there was dozens and dozens and dozens of deer along the side of the road, like dead and alive. And I'm like, oh damn, like this is crazy.
So I live in DuPont. It's getting crazy down there too, right? With raccoons and coyotes. Like every day we had like 3 or 4 raccoons in our yard. They go to a front porch of neighbors. And yesterday I was driving down to DuPont. I looked aside. There was a pack of 6 coyotes walking down the walking trail, walking on the sidewalk.
Damn.
Like, what in the world?
Like they own the place?
Yeah, like what in the world's going on? Like, these coyotes are out for a family stroll on the sidewalk. What the hell?
That's hilarious.
So next, let's talk about your new book, Born to Fail, and your 5-2 experience. They're kind of intertwined, right? So let's talk about that. Like, what made you write the book in the first place? What motivated you to write the book?
Well, that actually kind of started out as in Garrison. The NCOs and officers were just lying about any little thing. So it was like, one example was what really made me buy a voice recorder. Right? I started to record my conversations in secret with these people because I was like, man, I'm going to start recording because I don't want to get in trouble for something that someone who has authority over me is going to lie about. And so what made me go buy the voice recorder was I was at my wall locker, right? Because I lived off post. So I had wall lockers, at the work area. So I'm in my wall locker, just doing what I'm going to getting what I'm going to get. And then my platoon sergeant's like, Perez, why the fuck aren't you ready yet? I'm like, ready for what? Like, what's going on? He's like, what? Sergeant, whoever didn't tell you? And then Sergeant whoever walked up right behind him. And before I could even say anything, and he was like, oh, hey, Sergeant, did you tell Perez? And he's like, Roger, Sergeant, I told him. And I'm like, oh, you lying mother. You didn't tell me shit. But if you say like, hey, I didn't tell him, now I'm not going to get in trouble. And now you're going to be the one who gets in trouble. So he lied. And after that, I was like, man, this is petty shit. If you're going to lie over petty shit, like who knows what you're going to be willing to lie about. So that's when I went and bought the voice recorder and started recording my conversations with these important people. And so I started just recording a whole bunch of conversations before I deployed. And when I was deployed, I recorded conversations, typed in my laptop, and mostly wrote in my little green, like 5x7, the military issue green book. Actually, I think I have it here. Yeah. So my green book. So I started writing in it, and it's basically cover to cover.
Raise up some.
Yes, it's, cover to cover. So whenever I was out on mission, since I didn't have my laptop because I was on mission, I was just writing in this book. Because and it was insane, the stuff we were experiencing and going through and the way they were treating me and, the guys I love. So I started just writing a whole bunch of stuff. And like I said, that was just when I was out on mission, I can type tenfold faster than I can write. So whenever I was on my computer, I was just going crazy. And I always wanted to tell the story of what we were experiencing and what was going on. And so, yeah. And then, what really spurred me to write was in 2018. One of the guys we served with lost his life to cancer, to like a super rare form of cancer that only a couple hundred people have ever had. And it got me thinking about like the water they had as drinks. They were just pallets of water out in the sun. And that's what killed me about being over there, is like like I would spend easy 10 minutes at a pallet so I could get water for me to drink. I would dig through the middle of the pallet, open up a water, take a sip, tastes like pure plastic, dump it, because I don't want anybody to drink it, just dump it. Next. Oh, potable. Next, potable. So I'd spend time there just looking for water that was tolerable to drink. And so whenever he got sick from this rare form of cancer, I was like, I couldn't help but think of that poison water they were making us drink. So I just wrote this quick op-ed. I did it in like 15 minutes. I was just like so mad at the world about, this young 28, 29-year-old man survived war, came home and got sick to one of the rarest forms of cancer ever. And so it just made me want to write, and I wrote that op-ed and people liked it. They're like, yeah, but you get some of the passion, all right? Like you wrote it because you were mad, like, and maybe some fact check yourself with some of the stuff, add some sources. So I started to do some research and stuff like that. So yeah, I just started with that. And I wrote this op-ed. I sent it to the Seattle Times. And then I also was just Google searching water quality issues, like water quality articles, because in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh, if I can find a reporter that's reporting on water quality, maybe they'd be interested in what I wrote about the water we drink overseas. And at the time, there was a whole bunch of articles being written by the Military Times about water quality on bases because of the PFAS and the aircraft foam that runs off and contaminates the water and stuff. People were getting sick on military bases because of it. And so I reached out to her. It was like a Friday. I reached out and I emailed her. I was like, hey, I wrote this. I see you're writing water quality articles about stuff in the States. I wrote this about water quality overseas. If you can connect me with somebody who cares about water quality overseas, that would be great, but whatever. And so she emailed me back through her iPhone, because, whenever you respond an email, it's sent from your iPhone or whatever. So she responded back and forth with me over the weekend through her iPhone, through her personal messaging, her phone. And she was like, yeah, this is great. Do you want to run it in the Military Times? And I was like, well, that would be cool, but I would love it in the Seattle Times first, because I would like a civilian audience. Like us in the military know each other's problems. Like, if I say, hey, water's making us sick overseas, they'd be like, yeah, we remember drinking that poison water. But I wanted a civilian audience to see it first, at least. So I told her like, hey, please wait. Let's see what Seattle Times says. And, we'll take it from there. And then, that following week, Seattle Times rejected the piece. And then I emailed her back like, hey, they rejected me. I'm happy to run it now. And like crickets, she never got back to me. And I couldn't help but feel like she went to work, because she was all for it over the weekend. And then I can't help but feel like she went to work on Monday, talked to her superiors, did some research into my unit, and decided like, no, that's not.
Yeah, leave that one alone.
Yeah, leave that one alone. And so whenever I didn't hear back from her, I'm like, damn, how weird is that for her to be like super for it, messaging me back and forth over the weekend, right? From her personal phone. And then on Monday, crickets. And so I said, you know what, man, people think they're going to silence this story. So I wrote my book. So yeah, man, I just wanted to write the story of what really happened. And then before that, earlier in that year, the Seattle Times had invited me to give that talk that I did for them, their Ignite Education Lab. And so that's what really spurred it to be a memoir rather than just than a book about my military service. Because the way I thought about it was, if I told the story of how I ended up in that unit, if it convinced 1 or 2 out of every 10 readers that it's real, like, because I felt if I just wrote about what we experienced, nobody would believe it because the shit was crazy. So if I wrote about how I ended up in that unit, well, if I can convince a handful of people more per 10, 20 that it's true, then hey.
Because 5.2 only lasted, for like 3 or 4 or 5 years, right?
4 years, yeah, 2006, 2010.
And then they like strike everything from them for like all the Army history or something like that, or?
Yeah, pretty much. It's funny because I was talking to another podcast host recently about it, and they're like, yeah. Oh, because it was, I told them about how the Army Times did an article on our brigade, and on the front cover in big bold letters, it said "The Brigade from Hell." And I was already out at the time, and I saw it at like the Walmart's are on Spanaway and stuff around the base. The Walmart's carried those Military Times stuff, so like a whole rack and a whole row just like "The Brigade from Hell." And I saw that with my wife. I was like, oh, that's funny. I bet you that's about us, like jokingly, And sure enough, it was about 5th Brigade. And I'm like, oh, damn, I wish I would have actually flipped it open and be like, damn, this is about, I would have bought like 10 copies to have to, save it. And I was telling somebody that, and they're like, oh, well, go look online. You should be able to find some online record of it. Man, I have found things from the Army Times, the Military Times about the unit, but they're dead links. They're dead video links. They're dead text links. And I'm like, whoa, this is really weird.
Because
Like,
didn't 5.2 have like people like smoking marijuana, like
yeah.
killer teams, and like
Mhm.
there's all kind of craziness.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest drama out of all that is definitely the kill team, because the drug use that happens every deployment, like the drug and alcohol abuse, like dudes getting shipped alcohol up there or whatever, like shit's been going on since Vietnam and then some, like dudes using their shotgun barrels to smoke weed. So, for obviously it's one thing to smoke a joint in the combat zone and purposely murder civilians. So, the drug stuff is obviously shunned, right? soldiers shouldn't be, getting toasted while they're trying to, do their job.
Yeah.
But, it's just one of those things where, it's a crazy place to be. And man, you got to hold on to sanity any way you can, because, you got to go out there every day and, you never know when that last, mission is going to, when that next mission is going to be the last one. So
I remember wasn't like Army Times where one of the lieutenant colonel, one of the battalion commanders accused the brigade commander of like having like, send out revenge teams because like he was mad. He was mad at Iraqis for killing some people, so he's taking off Afghanistan people, like the Taliban.
Oh,
and of course, when 5.2 first hit, y'all were getting like slaughtered pretty much, right? I mean, y'all getting slaughtered, but like IED hits like almost daily basis. Y'all areas of Afghanistan we had never been in before.
Yeah,
this all this bad stuff went on, and then like it's like do this brigade commander kind of break and like go on a revenge thing, I mean, that was out there too.
Yeah, that was that's like the big, if you search 5th Brigade, that's a lot of what you find on the internet is talking about the leadership being gung-ho and not implementing, was it like General Petraeus's coin, right? The counterinsurgency to go and create these humanitarian type missions.
I think the battalion commander accused the brigade commander of actually having body counts. Like, back in Vietnam, we had body counts. Our body counts is 10,000 Vietnam killed. We're winning. Well, no, you're not. And so supposedly the brigade commander 5.2 had body counts. Like they were keeping, I remember reading that.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm not, I do know that there was a lot of, because it wasn't only him, it was also the sergeant major. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but sergeant major, he was like famous for in Iraq. He had like beat an insurgent to death with his helmet, his Kevlar, because he's doing his patrol or whatever, weapon jam, scuffle, pistol jam. You're like worst case scenario, right? You're going to use your helmet to defend yourself. But yeah, I mean, he had to resort to that, and of course, it made him kind of famous in the combat circle, the combat world. And so yeah, it was just these guys, these hardcore infantrymen who thought they knew the right way to go about getting the mission done. And of course,
but how you do things in Iraq is totally different. How you got to do things in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and that was a big thing with when we got there, like the counter IED lanes. They would tell the instructors, which were civilian instructors, who I'm sure were obviously they're contractors, but like ex-military who maybe have experience in both theaters. I'll never forget, they told us, in Iraq, you go fast. You go 100 miles an hour everywhere and you blow by those IEDs and hope they don't blow you up. Here in Afghanistan, you go slow. He's like, you go slow here because they will see you coming miles away, and you want to go slow because you want to make sure the culvert's clear. You want to make sure that you're not going to get blown up, and you can't go slow. Like it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, how are you going to go get missions done, but go slow? Like, you can't go slow. And, to an extent, right, you can. But, I mean, when there's deadlines and when vehicles get hit and you have to respond, and, like, you can't go slow. And that's just part of, and there's, of course, there's always, what do you call it? It's like the kill zones, or like the funnels, the fatal funnels, whether that's the natural terrain or, things like that. And that's how a lot of these vehicles ended up getting, hit catastrophically, was just like these kill zones that the locals.
And 5.2, you're the first striker brigade. Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
So you already had the spotlight on you. The Taliban knew you were coming. That here comes this Striker Brigade, oh wow, let's and they
Yeah.
probably had a focus on y'all. Let's just show them what their technology is all about. There's nothing here.
Yeah, and a big part of why, like, there was a lot of times we couldn't go out on mission because we didn't have any vehicles. All our vehicles were shredded and blown up, whether that was like, they were catastrophically destroyed or they just got hit hard enough to maybe nobody died in the vehicle or really got hurt, but the vehicle was shredded. Like all the wheels are blown off and all the undercarriage is torn up. Because when we went, they were flat bottom. All the strikers had flat bottom holes. So any little bomb we hit, it just shredded the striker. And now they're V bottom striker holes. So now anytime they get hit underneath, most of the explosion is kind of like the MRAPs, right? Because the MRAPs at the time had that V bottom. And so no, not us, man. We were the first ones there. We didn't have, it's funny because there's this podcast that it focuses on, Afghanistan and Afghanistan veterans. And they're always sharing pictures of themselves and multicam walking in line with metal detectors. And I'm like, y'all got metal detectors? Like, we didn't. And then we like, the only people who had metal detectors when we were there were the Air Force guys. And it was always like, it always aggravated me. Like, man, these guys don't patrol like us. Yeah, they came through and, did their job when we'd secure it. But they get out of their vehicle and they'd have like these metal detectors were like maybe the size of a shoebox when it was folded. And then they could unfold it to be like the full size metal detector. And so it always drive me a little bit crazy to see like my buddies are losing their limbs and their lives out here because we're out here in the grind every day. But these Air Force dudes who don't patrol on our level or the way we do it have these metal detectors. And I'm just like, oh, why can't we get one, or maybe one per platoon or one per company, just something, like, so, and, eventually they did get them right. Cause like I said, it was just kind of weird to see like these infantrymen with metal detectors, like, man, we're just out there just getting, walking through it.
And so when did you actually start writing your book?
Well, technically while I was overseas, 2009, but, actually sit down, 4 or 5 hours a night in 2018 when we lost, whenever all that stuff happened with the op-ed and stuff like that. And yeah, I started writing. I was going crazy writing and I didn't write probably very much. I probably got a lot of my grade school stuff out. And then when I got to the military, that self-doubt crept in, man. I was like, man, who's going to read a book about me? I'm nobody, right? Like everybody's got trauma. Everybody's got issues. So I stopped writing. That's when I filed the patent. And then it was my patent attorney's book that spurred me to go back to writing my book. Because he's got a remarkable story himself. He actually passed the bar before he graduated law school. Like he was just so much about patent law. He interned at a law firm, and he asked them, "Can I please take home your encyclopedias of books so I can just study them at home?" And they're like, "We're not supposed to, but sure." And so yeah, he was taking home these law books and just going crazy studying them, and like he just infatuated with patent law, and he ended up passing the bar before, like, he was legally allowed to practice law before he even graduated law school because he was just so high speed at it, like he just loved it. He just dove into it. And then he talked about just how, he ended up graduating anyways because it's important, to network and to get the full scope of the curriculum and you see your blind spots and things like that. But then he goes on to work at one of I can't remember what it was called. It was the patent little office or patent house or whatever of like Alexander Graham Bell and like the original, like this 100+ patent place, right? Where these attorneys in this place has been around forever. He got his dream job there, right? And it's a crazy story of how he got the job there. And then, he just kind of realized like, yo, I need to just step out on my own, right? Like I'm not being as fulfilled as I thought at work. So, yeah. And so whenever, he's got a crazy story of how he started his patent, his own patent, law firm, being a patent attorney. And so at the end of the book, he kind of talks about how we all have to share our story. We all need to share our story because you never know what's going to come of it. Like one example he gives is, there was a law school student who wrote a book about his first year of law school, right? Just for whatever reason, wrote this book about his first year of law school and his experiences. And now that book is like recommended reading at law schools around the country for first year law students. Like, hey, here's this book. This is what you can expect, more or less. And so another example is like Anne Frank, right? And her story, her incredible stories. Like a lot of people experienced the Holocaust. A lot of people were hiding in attics, and a lot of people, you know what I'm saying? Like there was a lot of people experiencing those things, but not everybody wrote them down for to share. And I'm like, damn, that's like really powerful messages. Like, and that's why whenever I was fact checking my book and going through it and talking to guys I hadn't talked to in 10 years and hearing their stories, I'm like, wow, like I was there when this happened. How did I not know? And wow, like so we were all there all at the same time doing the same things, but we all had such vastly different experiences. And I'm like, wow, this is so crazy. And the final reason I tell people to why they should write their own story is because it's very cathartic, you know, like growing up, you know, I raised myself from a young age, parents divorced, and I have an older sister, 8 years older than me. And growing up, I always wondered like, man, or, by the time I was like junior high, high school, I always wondered like, why wasn't she there more for me? You know, like she should have been, because you see these stories of, on TV, like, hey, 12-year-old kid raised their 6-year-old, or their 6-year-old brother or sister. And it's this crazy story, a kid by the time they were 15 had to get a job to take care of little brother or something, And so I always wondered like, man, why doesn't my sister do that for me? It's like this weird thing that, I always wondered. And then I wrote my book and I realized like, damn, whenever my parents divorced, I was 6 and she was like 12 or 13, maybe 14 at the oldest. I was like, damn, no wonder why she wasn't around. Like she was trying to avoid the shitty environment too. I wouldn't have wanted to have been around either. I would have been out with my friends or just away from home. So it was just like writing and seeing the perspective and like putting, like I said, even just going through some military stuff. Like in my mind, there was months between certain things. But when I went back and did the work, I was like, wow, these are weeks. And then when I went back in early childhood stuff and thinking about other people's perspectives and how shitty I was to them and, whatever, I'm like, damn, like I need to let go of this stuff because it's unnecessary, like she was a kid and, she didn't want to be around the nonsense too. So
Ricardo, what was your writing process?
Well, I started out, because I didn't know how to write a book. I just started out chronologically from the earliest memories that I could remember to where I wanted to stop writing and finish the story. And so yeah, I just like literally chronological from the earliest memories to everything I wanted to list. And yeah, there's a lot of stories that I'm glad I didn't write down because it's like a lot of nonsense from high school, like, just partying and nonsense.
That's a good question. Like, how do you decide what to include, what not to include?
Well, that's going to, I did include some stories of the partying, but like, I mean, there's obviously, right, high school kids party. So you could write a whole separate book. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like most people can write a whole different book.
I mean, they made a whole movie, Project X, about what a high school party, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I just realized like, look, I'm not going to spend all this time and effort telling these stories that probably no one's going to want to read, right? There's nothing
no value
substantive.
add.
Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? A few of them are important because of the close calls that happen. But for the most part, it's all just nonsense. So I thankfully didn't spend a lot of time writing down the nonsense and just push the story along chronologically with what happened with me. And then when I got done writing it all, I had 100,000 word journal of my life. And I'm like, damn, like, I know this is not how books, like you read a memoir and it's never just, I was born, I did this. And it's always jumping back and forth. So I'm like, oh, I need to learn how to format this thing into a book. Like it's a journal right now, but I need to turn it into a book. So I read 2 books on how to do it. Save the Cat Writes a Novel and The Story Grid. The Story Grid, I highly recommend to anybody because it's such a powerful book to get you to understand story and structure and conventions and things like that. So it's basically a textbook. It took the author who's an editor 10 years to write and put together. And he uses the silence of the lamb in the book to kind of show you how he died, with his process. So it's, not only are you reading a cool book and learning how to dissect story, you're also kind of getting the story of this, Silence of the Lambs along with it. So of course it's a great book. And the reason he says it's such a good book, The Story of the Lamb or The Silence of the Lambs, is because the writer was like a crime journalist. So he was a crime journalist for, over a decade probably. So he had already like lived in the world of crimes and shittiness, And so, yeah, he just thought like, hey, I've experienced this stuff enough. I think I can, write a really gripping story about a serial killer psycho.
And when did you bring on your editor, Anna? And I have no idea how to say her last name. When did Anna come on?
She, whenever I was a grad student at business school, I went to a lot of different departments, just popping in and out. It's kind of the benefit of being a student on campus. You can go to any department and be like, hey, I'm a student. Like, I know I don't ever come here, but hey, I'm a student here, so don't kick me out. And so in my mind, I thought like, man, I'm just going to go to the English department and get an editor, right? Because I'd love to have a fellow Husky help me edit this thing. And so yeah, I just went to the English department, walked in and just said, hey, this is who I am. I wrote a book and I'd like to get editorial help from here if possible. Do you have a list of grad students that I can reach out to? And they were like, well, sorry, we used to have a list of grad students, the English grad students. But that's something they stopped, a couple of years ago, whatever. And she was like, but if you write something and send it to the dean, or not the dean, but like the director, right, of the English department. If you send it to the director, she has the power to send it out to all the grad students. So just make sure it's something, compelling enough to make her want to send it out to all of the grad students. So I wrote down something that I felt was compelling, and she thankfully sent it out to all the grad students in the English department. And I got two people email me back. One of them was a Ph.D. English student who was a former Seattle Times reporter. She had wrote books herself, and she's a very accomplished individual. And she mostly reached out with recommendations because she was like, yo, I'd love to help you, but I can't right now. I'm a PhD student, blah, blah, blah. But she basically recommended that I kind of find someone else. Because what would be a good example? Well, I guess Silence of the Lambs is kind of a good example, right? Because you get like the side of Buffalo Bill and the craziness he's doing, but then you also get the side of Clarice and her investigative side. So she basically recommended like, tell your story of what you're experiencing overseas, but also find a reporter who was reporting here in the States and kind of tie those stories together. And I was like, well, because there's a lot of stories that are like that, right? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. But, that sounds like a lot more work than me just telling my story, because now I got to find someone else and get them wrapped in. And so, yeah. And then thankfully, Anna, she messaged me and she was like, hey, this sounds interesting. I'd like to help. And so we met up at the hub, the Husky, union building, I think is what it stands for. And yeah, we just met one day over lunch and talked, and I told her what I was doing and she agreed to help me. And so like 3 weeks later, COVID happened, and and it really, when COVID happened, obviously the world just flipped upside down for everybody, not knowing the extent of the virus and the pandemic. So yeah, so for the first probably 6 to 8 months, I didn't even message her. I think I might have, like I said before with the Navy vet who's helping me with this, like there's real life world shit going on. Like I'm not going to worry about like, hey, edit my book, like a pandemic's breaking out. So yeah.
As an editor, does she receive a certain percentage of your sales? So how does that work?
No, there was a couple ways. Like when you hire an editor, sometimes they might just charge you a flat rate based on the project, or they charge you per word. She charged me a little less than 2 cents per word. Wait. Yeah, I think a little less than 2 cents per word. It's like 0.017 or something like that, like a little less than 2 cents per word.
So what does editor actually do? They like tell you, hey, you use this word is better. You're saying this is the better way to say it. Instead of saying this in 2,000 words, we can say it in 500 words.
Well, what Anna helped me do, like I said, because I wrote the journal, 100,000 word journal, and then I learned how to write a book. So then I realized, like I said, it was just 100,000 word, like there was no structure to it. And then I realized the way I should write it is the first 25% of my book be my grade school story. The middle 50%, like the guts of the book, be the military stuff that I always wanted to tell. And then the last 25% of the book, me getting out of the military and going on my academic journey leading up to UW. And so I structured that, right? Like I did that part after this chronological journal mess. I turned it into that. And then I brought it to Anna and I was like, hey, look, I know this is still not right because it's not, a book is never just chronological. It's got to hop around and I need your help. Like I need help. So now, she took it from this chronological thing and now it jumps around in time a little bit, right? Like we're tell the story and then it jumps.
So it's almost like flashbacks.
Yeah, in a sense, and then it also a really important thing with her was thinking about character development, right? Because I'm the character and it's my story. So I'm not thinking about like the details and, conveying certain things to the reader. And then whenever she's reading, she's like, yo, like, this is cool that you wrote this, but now you need to like delve deep a little more into your psyche of what you were thinking and why. And, blah, like we need some character development here. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, I can easily type a couple sentences explaining whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits, of course, and that's why, beta readers and alpha readers and, getting as many eyes on it as you can before it kind of goes public. And for me, like one of the final things that I did was a Grammarly run through where I used the program Grammarly, which is like this editing software, to go through, right? One last run through to make sure it's good to go to release it. And there were so many really and about. I think it was really and about, but for sure, really. So I was like, oh, I was really, I was tired, I was going to go do this and I was really tired, or I was doing this and it was really fast. It was like really, like there were so many really. So I was like, oh my goodness. Like and it was funny because with one of my readers who gave me a bunch of feedback and stuff, I sent him a message. I was like, man, I'm really sorry I made you read that. Really, really, really. I'm really sorry. He's like, what? Why are you telling me? I'm like, well, I just did this edit and I probably removed easily up 100 to 200 reallys as that final run through. And like I said, it's just, the editor is definitely an important thing because it's important to be your own editor too, which is why I recommend people read that book because ultimately you're the one who knows, right? But it is important to get that outsider perspective.
And was this Anna's first book that she edited?
No, she mostly, I think this is her first, like, I guess like your normal typical, like normally she's edited. I know for a fact she's done editing for financial textbooks before. So she's done textbook editing before. And so that's why whenever
your book's a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why whenever we were first talking about it, she's like, well, this is the extent of my experience, but I can handle it. And I was like, oh, okay. I got complete faith in you. And then it was funny because there was another guy, an undergrad who was a part of he was a good friend of one of my classmates at UW. And he was like the lead editor or the guy in charge of the Huskies newspaper there. And he's like, oh, let me be your editor. I don't think he ever directly told me, but he's like, yo, my classmate was like, hey, he wants to really be your editor. And I really wanted to hire him, but I felt like not even the fact that he was an undergrad, but just the fact that he's a dude. And like, I wanted a woman's perspective, because it's all like manly infantry, you know what I'm saying?
You needed a woman's perspective. Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah. So I told him, I was like, yo, man, we're going to work on a documentary. And if you want to help with that after, like, that's cool. But I think for the book, like I need to go with Anna because and I'm glad I did, because I really feel like having, a feminine kind of perspective and touch to it was really, because most readers are females to begin with, so that's why I felt really strongly about, not only was she a grad student and more experienced, but
because who knows how many, mothers of soldiers are going to read this, you got to take the bro stuff out of it. So let's switch back real fast to the research scientist part you did. I was about that. So what kind of diseases, what kind of research do you actually do? Is that COVID, like measles, like what kind do you do research on, and who decides what you can do research on?
Well, so what I do now in the evenings, but I'm switching back to days next week. So like tomorrow is basically my last day in the evening in the front of I'm lying.
So it's a 24/7 operation.
Oh yeah. 24/7. Yeah. It's 24/7. It's, I always call it the labs that never sleep because man, it's a wartime effort there. It's pretty remarkable stuff. And I'm very fortunate, because there's not a lot of places I can be a scientist at night, so really fortunate to be in this spot where it's open 24 hours and allows me the flexibility and freedom to work my kind of whatever I need to work. And the cool thing about it is even when I got hired, my boss was like, look, your hours are 9 to 5, but based on experiments, like, your hours are going to be a little bit wacky. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So.
And you actually work on the UW campus or somewhere else?
No, I work Eastlake.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now I work in Eastlake and they're opening a new spot in Renton. And so I'll be back and forth working in Renton and here in Eastlake. And so, We mostly sequence COVID or SARS-CoV-2, the novel coronavirus. We mostly sequence that because it's what's paying the contracts, right? The government's like, writing fat checks for universities to do this sequencing work and to do this kind of thing to track the stuff down and make sure, we're eyes on new variants as they pop up. And so it's mostly, like I said, the novel coronavirus that gets sequenced, but we do sequence other things like herpes and HPV. And yeah, I've gotten some weird stuff before. Like, I want to say, what was it, hamster or something from like, I don't know. I'm sure it was, I'm sure it was like some human born virus. Like maybe it was HPV, but it was like a hamster sample or, I don't want to say it was hamster.
And when you say sequence, you mean like genetic sequencing and stuff like that? Or,
yeah, like sequencing.
So can you like a brief 10,000-foot explanation of what exactly what that is?
So how we started with the alpha variant and it went to beta, and then the delta variant was very dominant for a long time and it made a lot of people sick. And then the Omicron variant came through, was more mild, but it was very contagious. So the DNA in these viruses are slightly different, right? Because it's basically the same kind of virus, but as they mutate and they exponentially, replicate and mutate, there's going to be small changes in that DNA, right? Because those mutations happen. And so when those small changes happen, it creates a new variant that could make us more sick. It could be, like I said earlier, the Delta was getting people more sick, but wasn't as contagious as the Omicron, which is easier to get, but doesn't make you as sick. And so they're the same virus, right? They're just different variants. So if you look at their DNA in snippets, right? So we can choose how many base pairs, because, DNA comes in base pairs, right? We can choose how many base pairs, 20 base pairs, 30 base pairs, it all depends. So we can choose like snippets of the DNA we want to look at. And then, based on the real scientists, that's what I'm saying, like the real scientists with the PhDs figure the shit out and tell us what to do. And then we go through and we, not to say that we don't know what we're doing, but, we go through and we're the grunt workers, right? We're the people that mostly in the lab doing the ground level stuff. And so, so they tell us like, hey, this is what you got to do because this is the snippet of the DNA we're going to look at. And then that's what gets kind of turned into a library. So you have this snippet of DNA and you can't just like feed DNA into a sequencer. You have to get it ready, right, for the sequencer to read it. So we put like what's called barcoding or indexes on the ends of the DNA. So it's just like other little chemical crap that we put on the ends of the DNA. So that way, when we feed it into the sequencer, there's a thing in the sequencer that catches it. And in order for it to get caught, it needs those indexing barcodes. Or it serves two purposes. It serves to help it get caught on the thing, and it helps it get read, like, because it's a barcode that the machine needs to read, right? And that's kind of why they're called barcodes too. And I might be screwing that up a little bit because I know there's like what is it called? It's like the index and the barcode. There's like another little primer that gets attached to the end, and then after that, it's the barcode. I'm pretty sure, but yeah, like I said, it's been a while since I've worked the sequencing side of it. It's been a few months, but.
So I'm guessing equipment you use is like real powerful equipment, right?
Yeah, it's the world's most cutting edge sequencing technology. It's the NovaSeq, the big machine we use. It's $1 million machine, and every time we run it, like, it's such an expensive pipeline. It's one thing that freaked me out recently because now that I work the front of the pipeline, I'm just basically like getting these plastic plates, and what I do is I get a bunch of tubes, right, with COVID positive samples. They're all COVID positive that I deal with. So I put them all in these racks, and then a machine, because these are like the swabs, right? There's like literally swabs still in some of them. And then the machine takes out the fluid and puts it in a plate. And then I put that plate in something else. And then that other machine breaks up the cells to release the viral RNA. And then at the end, I get left with a plate of viral RNA that's, from COVID. And then it gets worked on during the day by my coworkers that are there to create the libraries and feed the sequencers.
So this can be probably ignorant question, but how do y'all not get COVID if you're with COVID all the time?
Well, it's all done very safety, like in a biological safety hood or a BSC, biological safety cabinet. So basically there's these engineered hoods where, it's like a glass that we put down, and then we can stick our arms underneath and work in here.
Okay.
And there's like it's created to make a vacuum away from us, right? So even if we spilt stuff, it would not like the aerosolization, right? If I were to spill a liquid and it's going to get aerosolized, right? Like some of it, you see the liquid puddle, but what you don't see is some of it gets kicked up into the air. So what happens is when that happens in those hoods, the stuff that gets kicked up and aerosolized, which would make you sick, right? Because the COVID puddle isn't going to get me sick. It's the COVID that got aerosolized and that I'd be breathing in is what would get me sick. So, but in those things, it's all safe. And, you know, and there's, of course, we wear gloves and there's hand washing stations everywhere. And we clean the labs, we bleach everything and ethanol clean everything. It's all very clean and hygienic.
So Ricardo, you know, everyone was wearing masks. Do these masks actually work? And of course, you know, if you have like the N95 and silk masks that work, but these like cloth masks, like these, do they really work, or there's more like cosmetic and make people feel good about having a mask on? How effective were they at actually like stopping people from getting it and spreading it?
I mean, I know there's a lot of data and research behind it, so I don't want to like speak too specifically. I will speak kind of broadly in terms of how I feel about it. You know, obviously the mask, if it's just like one of the surgical masks, like the N95s are obviously better. They're a little bit more form fitting. And of course, if you have a beard or anything, it kind of negates masks. It's almost like the gas mask, and that's why we have to be clean shaven, right? So it's almost like that same thing. But what for the important thing for me, I think, is, especially for me, working in the labs that we work in, I hope we never go back to not wearing masks, because like we're working in a clinical lab where things should be clean, and you know, like you're trying not to contaminate your samples. So now we have a mask over our mouth. So if we're in the lab talking to each other, like when you talk, you're naturally going to spit a little, you know? So we're like working over these plates of important stuff. And if we're talking now, the mask is at least catching our aerosolized saliva. And so, yeah, it's, I'll never forget when I first got into the entrepreneurship program at UW. One of the people in the program was talking to me. This was before COVID, was talking to me, right, as a new student. And they were talking to me. I'm going to use they because I don't even want to identify their gender. And I want to keep this as generic as possible. They were talking to me. And as they were talking, a little piece of spit flew out coming right for me. Boop, and it landed on me. And I just pretend like I didn't see it, because like, it's just one of those things that happens, and I always find it funny because I made a post on Facebook the other day. I'm like, have you ever told anybody, say it, don't spray it? And then like people are like, yeah. And then they came up with like other funny sayings for it or whatever. And I'm always thinking like, wouldn't you have preferred that they've been wearing a mask so they're not spraying you down with their saliva? Like, not even if they're sick or not, just like basic human, don't be spitting on me and stuff, And so that's the way I feel about it. Like obviously the N95s are going to give you better protection, but at a minimum, having these things on are keeping us from spitting on each other and potentially, passing something else along.
And just think of all the things that we did pre-COVID, we'll never do again, right? I mean, how many times did you go to a Chuck E. Cheese birthday party with a bunch of 10, 20 kids? Yeah. And the birthday person blew out the candles, spit all the cake, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone ate it, right?
Well, yeah, it was kind of like when my oldest daughter, I only had one daughter at the time, is how young she was. We took her to Legoland, and Legoland is literally a bunch of kids just grabbing everything. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I just couldn't help but feel like I know she's going to get sick when we leave this place. And sure enough, she got sick. But, but yeah, it's just like some of those things where I'm sure Legoland does a lot of work now these days, of course.
It's just amazing how things change. Like, oh, the airplane can be this clean, right? Oh, yeah. You don't have to be right behind me in line, right? Yeah. Oh, you don't have to like cough out loud on a public place, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing for me. Sense. It's like now I can't stand, now that we have the mask mandate lifted here in Washington, I can't stand when I'm talking to people and like they're closer than the 6 feet or whatever. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is I can feel their breath. Like I can feel them breathing on me. And I'm like, yo, you're a little bit too close to me, like, and when I was in Texas in December, we went to like a bar and grill place for lunch. While I was, I met up with some friends for lunch, and I'm standing in the line and there's a guy behind me, like standing behind me. And he's like literally right here. Like I could probably, like if he was behind me right here, I go right there and smack him in the face. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking like, hey, can I get some, like there's plenty of room in the line. It's like a crowded place. You know what I'm saying? Like we had room and this guy just wanted to crowd me. And I'm like, man, this is weird. Like, the whole pandemic, they've been like 6 feet, 6 feet, and this dude's giving me like 6 inches. Like I understand, like whatever, that didn't bother me, but what just bothered me was like he was in my space, like not even the COVID stuff, but like, damn, you would think at this point you'd understand, like give people a little bit of space at this point.
So what's the future of COVID? Are we gonna have to deal with like variants every 6 months for the rest of our lives, like varying degrees?
What it really comes down to, I think, early on, early on, I felt like when this first happened, I felt like we probably aren't going to get out of this till like 2024, 2025, because human nature, when things go wrong, we try to go fast, and then like there's always an accordion effect, and that's basically what's been happening, right? We have our different waves of COVID have been happening, right? So they're basically like this accordion effect. And so, yeah, I always, figured that we're never going to, it's like driving in traffic, right? Like it's hard to stay at the same speed and keep the same pace with each other. So there's always going to be like these effects, that the logistical effects, like the logistics with all the shipping in the world with COVID, right? Like everything got shut down. So there was more, supply than demand, or depending on what the stuff was. But so, yeah, it's just like these things. And yeah, we're going to be in it for a while. And there's two things I want to say about this topic as well. So a long time ago, are you familiar with Elizabeth Holmes? The Theranos? Yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah, the golden girl who failed everyone, who scammed everyone.
What drives me crazy about that, and I wish I was I also learned that I'm one of the OG YouTubers. Like, as I was uploading videos on YouTube in like 2007, my army stuff, and YouTube was like a year too old, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. But I wish I could go back and take better care of that channel and whatever. And there was always, I'll regret never making this video. Whenever Elizabeth Holmes was like hot shit in the news everywhere for creating this, incredible technology that nobody else, and she dropped out of college and like all this crazy shit. Me as an undergraduate going to school for chemistry and engineering, I smelt bullshit from 2,000 miles away in Texas, man. I was like, there's no way that this young woman, with all the remarkable scientists in the world, right? Not even in the US, right? Like creating this one drop of blood testing technology. I couldn't believe it, man. There was like nothing.
And the fact that her board of directors had no science on. They're like 4-star war generals.
Yeah. Yeah. So not even just that, of course, that was before she got Mattis on her board and all these guys. Like it never sat right with me. And I was like I said, it just didn't make sense, right? Like you have all these great scientists all over the world, but yet this girl who did 2 years at Stanford or less dropped out and, like patented this great stuff or whatever. Like it never seemed right to me. And sure enough, it was never right.
Yep. And so outsourced it to the Philippines and the Walgreens.
And so I'm probably not going to make a lot of friends with this. I know I'll probably make some enemies, but I feel the same way about the COVID-19 inventor, or the mRNA vaccine inventor, that old, I don't even know what his name is. He's a doctor or whatever, right? He's a Ph.D. scientist. He calls himself the mRNA inventor, vaccine inventor, because he did the original research in like the 80s or something, right? Like he was one of the first people to recognize that this messenger RNA could potentially be used one day in the far future to create a cure for something. So yeah, I'm not saying he's not a scientist. I'm not saying he's not smart, but the way I feel about it is that's like saying the Wright brothers invented the Falcon 9. You know what I'm saying? Like just because you were the pioneers in aerodynamics doesn't mean you were the inventor of the Boeing 747. You know what I'm saying? Like, so to go on that stretch of, hey, I had patents on mRNA stuff in the 80s, to be like, yo, I invented this vaccine technology, I feel like that's kind of a stretch. So like I said, and what really made me shady about this was one of my buddies from the army. He sent me a video with this guy, and also the Olympic college guy. He's like, he's Feinstein or something like that. Weinstein. He's the guy who got famous for Olympic college for like standing up to the woke kids. And do you remember any of that? That happened here in Washington. He went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and that's obviously what made him famous. But yeah, so Joe Rogan basically invited him on because this professor was going viral for standing up to these woke kids. And, because they were just trying to get them to, I don't know, it was like stupid lizard brain college kid stuff. It was like this stupid stuff. They were trying to provoke him to say something racist or to do something, like to just make him point out his privilege of being a white male, like something stupid, and he like stood up for himself, and it went viral on the internet, and Rogan invited him to his podcast. And it turns out guy's a brilliant guy. He's a really smart scientist and a smart guy. But what bothered me was like, this guy created the podcast, had this mRNA vaccine inventor on, and they're talking about data, and they're like, oh, well, look at this data. And, this is why you should be, cautious about the vaccine or whatever the thing was. And so they're like, look at the data, look at the data, look at the data. I'm like, okay, I want to look at the data. So I go to the link right there. They're like, oh, if you want to see the data, click on the link, in the description. So I clicked it, go to their website, which is a blog. And if you want to see the data, you have to pay.
Oh.
And I'm just like, oh, like
not a good look.
Yeah, I was saying like, because the way I think about it is the data that they got, this data was more than likely publicly sourced data from government research or university research. But at the end of the day, it was publicly available data that you're claiming you saw, but yet you're telling me you starts with the C, you got it all ready for me. I can't think of the word right now. You got it all ready for me to look at, but now you want to pay me to see it, or you want me to pay to see it. And so like right there, you're telling us you want to see the data. You're telling us you care about the public. You're telling us not to take the vaccine. You're telling us, look at the data, but you want to make us pay to see the data? Like, no, it's weird, man. It's weird. And so it kind of bothered me, and I lost a little bit of respect for that other guy, because he seemed like a real straight shooter, and then to have that guy on his podcast and then be like that, and then be like, yeah, look at the data, but you got to pay for it on this guy's blog, and it's like, oh, kind of cringe,
So Ricardo, let's go back like the first day that COVID came out, the COVID became like a pandemic. So how were this? So COVID just comes out, all these, the war is going to end, all this stuff, right? Did COVID end up being like not as bad, as worse, the same? Did we get off easily, or did we get lucky, or did it end up like the experts thought it was going to end up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got pretty lucky, or I definitely got lucky in my own personal world, because obviously the pandemic, there's a really interesting thing I heard recently was we're now getting to the point in America of about 1 million people who have died from COVID. And so they're like, there's 300, we'll just say 320 million people in the US. 1 million have died from COVID. Even if you go that times 5, so like, let's say the person that died, the 5 people closest to them that were impacted, their husband, their wife, their mother, their father, their siblings, their kids or whatever. The 5 closest people that were affected by those 1 million deaths, that only puts us at 5 million people who were strongly affected by COVID. And yeah, a lot of people got sick and, maybe were hospitalized for a little bit or whatever, but there were 1 million people who died. And as a quick, estimate, 5 million people who were really torn by the virus. But that's still a small fraction of the 320 million people in the US. Yeah. And that's why you get a lot of that. Let's just take the masks off. Let's roll back stuff. You know what I'm saying? Because most people were not directly impacted by the virus. And I'm like, damn, I never thought about it like that. That's kind of, it really puts it in perspective.
Based on stats, like very low percentage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It puts it in real perspective. And so that's why that's why I'm saying I got lucky, because the COVID was a blessing for me. It's kind of sad to say, because I was commuting 5 to 6 hours a day to go to school at UW. And that was just soul draining for me, the commute alone. And so when the pandemic hit, it killed my commute. And I was like, oh, I'm saying like, man, I'm spending 25 hours a week just driving to and from school. I'm spending a day a week, just driving to and from school. So I was thankful for that. And then of course, we started getting stimulus checks, right? A lot of people got stimulus checks, and we got stimulus checks. And because of the situation we were in, we used those checks to pay my wife's tuition for her master's degree. And so, for us, it was more of a blessing than a curse, because no one, I don't have anybody in my life that lost their lives directly. I do know of people that have loved ones that they lost, but no one was directly affected in my life. And so it was more, more benefit than detriment. And a big reason of why I feel I'm a scientist today, because I feel without COVID and the need for more scientists and lab techs and nurses and doctors, that I'd still be sweeping floors somewhere for UW, not for the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'd be bad to say, but COVID definitely was a blessing for a lot of people, right? I mean, that COVID definitely did a lot of people. And then it's about entrepreneurship, right? Of course, this is my opinion. So a lot of businesses went out of business because of COVID, right? My theory is like these businesses would have run out of business anyway, right? It might have taken 5, 10 years to go out of business. COVID has like amped up the process, right? Of them going out of business. Like, because your business has bad customer service. Well, it's just like highlighted, right? I know so many, especially restaurants. I know so many restaurants like did like out of the box thinking, deliveries, come to your, I mean, there's so many people like had great ideas and just doing business and thriving business, right? And so many other business like, oh, I just think that they would have got that business anyway.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing about, and that's, the double-edged sword of entrepreneurship is you have freedoms to, that was a kind of the big eye-opening thing about business school, was like learning that you can set up a business and make it however you want. If you want your employees to wear pink shirts and striped, black and white referee pants, that can be the uniform if you want it to be. Like, you literally get to choose everything. Of course, it's got to be within the laws and legal, and not trying to, minimize those who work, in your office or whatever. But yeah, it was kind of this eye-opening thing. And the beautiful thing about it is, you always hear about your personal finances, or like, hey, with your personal finances, you should have at least like 6 months of your household covered, right? Like if, someone passes away, can't work anymore, or someone gets hurt or something.
Like what fantasy land are you living in?
Yeah, well, it's a tough thing to do, no doubt, man. It's taken me, I've got to the point now where I can maybe manage, 4 at most 6 months, but it's taken me many years to get to that point. But the beautiful thing about that is it, allows flexibility. So when my wife has, drama at work, I'm like, don't stress at work, just quit. I'm like, we can float ourselves if need be, so just quit. But I say that because it's an important thing to do in our personal lives, but especially if you're a business owner. If you're a business owner, you need to try to have at least a year's worth of cash flow, or, like money saved up, because you never know when COVID's going to happen. You never know when the economy is going to take a dump. You never know when you're going to lose half your customer base. You never know XYZ, so,
some random car DUI person might ran the car into your place of business.
Yeah. So that's, I think that was what was really a big business killer, was a lot of people live in their personal lives paycheck to paycheck. So, a lot of these business owners run their businesses paycheck to paycheck. And so when those paychecks got cut off, or whenever COVID hit and the economy got, slammed and everything closed down, they didn't have the runway, maybe they could survive. And that was the sad thing, is they didn't need a year of runway. They just needed, 6 months. And then the government stepped in and started pumping money out for businesses. So that's why it's important to just have, to start, I think that's a big mistake a lot of founders make, is, that extra, the extra revenue, they start to pocket it, or, they don't, they buy bigger, better equipment when they don't necessarily need it right away, or they start to put more overhead on the plate. And then, it's like kind of like one of my experiences in my family, before the 2008 recession, one of the people in my family had a lot of property, businesses and stuff. And then the economy crashed and he had way too much overhead and lost it all, because he wasn't able to generate the revenue to cover all that overhead. And Uncle Sam came knocking for everything,
Yeah. So Ricardo, talk about ethics and genetics. I'll use example. And I'm pretty sure this happened, but I guess somewhere in China, the scientists did some genetic engineering where this child would never get HIV. And of course, that's a good thing, but that thing like that, he just did on his own. He didn't ask the parents' permission. Of course, I was not the kid's permission. Like, talk about genetics, ethics, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with somebody about this the other day, because he was trying to argue that there shouldn't be any ethics in science or something like that. I'm like, wait a minute, what? Yeah, it was a weird conversation, but but yeah, it's definitely important, because it's the reason why we test on animals first, right? Or like we try to avoid animal models if we can, right? Like at some point you do have to test on mice and other animals to make sure it's safe for humans, but that's the ethical part. Like, some people might say, well, it's unethical to do that to animals. And yeah, I agree to that to an extent, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's an important part of the reason why we're able to live to be over 100 years old. Like it's an important part to the longevity of us and our understanding. And not to say that, like I said, that there are mistreatment of animals and things like that that go on, because there's always those things that happen. There's always going to be bad actors. I'll never forget, part of the craziness of the book is me trying out for special forces. And that shit was crazy, but I'll never forget, man, some of the most powerful words ever spoken to me in the military happened at Special Forces Selection and Assessment, SFAS. And so when you first get there, they're giving you the briefs. And one of the cadre briefed us and he said, "You know what, guys, I want y'all to remember this." He goes, "No matter how many gates are in place, shit bags always get through." And I was just like, damn. So he's basically letting us know, like, obviously there's a lot of gates in place to earn that green beret, but no matter how many gates are in place, shit bags still get through. And I'm just like, damn, like that's deep. We're over here trying to get away from the shit bags, and now you're telling me that I'm going to go through all this shit and still have to deal with shit bags, like it's kind of disappointing. But yeah, I've just kind of carried that on everywhere. Like no matter the industry, no matter the, what I'm saying, like there's going to be bad actors and there's going to be people who don't want the best, who try to pocket, whatever for them and care about themselves at the end of the day. But
or just like, there's always the last in the class, right?
Yeah.
So you're flying, an airlines, you don't know that guy flying might have been the last in his class, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's just, on the ethics and genetic side of it, the way I think about it is, are you familiar with CRISPR, the genetic engineering? Yep. Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit before when we hang out, but, so there's that Chinese scientist who used CRISPR to engineer these twin girls. Have you heard about this? Yeah. To be resistant to AIDS.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. So
that's it. Yeah, that's the story.
Yeah. And so, I mean, doing that, like trying to protect humans from AIDS, from being able to contract AIDS, is a honorable, remarkable thing to do. But he went rogue and did it on his own, like without peer review, without making sure, because we all need to, we all have our blind spots, and that's the important thing about recognizing that as a scientist. And
why those twins, like, why they get so lucky, why not someone else? And how does that,
Yeah, so it's crazy, because these poor girls are going to be like basically lab animals for their life. I'm sure they're going to try to, well, I mean, it's, China, but who knows what the extent that they're going to take it to. But I mean, basically they're just going to keep these girls under a microscope and a fine-tooth comb to see ultimately what he did and what actually ends up happening, so it's I've actually listened to the audiobook of it's called The Code Breakers, and it's about Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize for the technology. And it's a beautiful book because it talks about all the players and everybody involved with it, not just her, everyone else, all the other university studies and her path and whatnot. And it's just interesting to hear them talk about how they can use it to delete human depression, like, because we have identified the gene that makes us depressed, so we could literally use CRISPR to go and cut that gene out and never get depressed again. But they talk about the implications of humans that never get depressed, right? So it's an important thing for us to get sad. And
have you ever watched the show called You're a Million? It comes on Nat Geo.
You're a million?
No, you're YEAR million. You're a million. It talks about humans like in the future, like a long time, like in the future.
Yeah, no.
It talks about that kind of the depression and the implications, like, people are depressed, like, the value they add, the resilience, you cut all that out, and is it really a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, and on the other side of the coin, I've read that it's going to be a critical tool in making us a space traveling species, because now we can engineer ourselves to be more resistant to the UV of space. And like, now we can engineer ourselves for our bodies to process the crap food, like all the processed food and fast food and stuff. We can engineer our bodies to make it like nutrition, what I'm saying, to take it on like it was nutrition. And so, of course, it's going to take years and billions of dollars to make this kind of stuff happen. But it's literally a tool now. It's like the most powerful, it's a whole new revolution. It's like a big part of the book. Like we had the, like the Iron Age, whatever, and then the Industrial Revolution, the technological revolution, and now we have the CRISPR revolution, and it's really going to change the future. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, one of the things when the episode is talking about the year million show, is talking about one of the predictions in the future, you're going to inject like nano stuff into your body, and these nano robots, you're going to call it, are going to go to your cells, and okay, you're about to get a code. That nano robot is going to know a code's coming on, it's going to destroy it, or you have codes coming on. It's going to be predisposed to predict virus or whatever coming, and like knock it out, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of reminds me of, because that's the problem with medicine today, is it's not very like, you take medicine and it basically courses through your whole body, right? It's very hard to get like point specialized medicine delivered to an area. And they talked about how, it was that guy, one of those guys from that podcast I was talking about earlier. They talked about how they were able to give shots now and get like the direct relief, or I don't know. It was kind of weird talking about the COVID or shot or something. And I thought it was really weird because they were just talking about how very broadly they're like, well, we know, if you inject something, that's where the medicine goes. And I was like, what? No, that's not how it works. Like, even if you inject something, it's still going to get course, I might say localized at the start, but eventually your body's, it's going to break down.
Travel everywhere.
Yeah. So it's kind of like this weird thing that they were speaking like it was factual. And I was like, what? That's not true. Like, that's like one of the biggest problems in medicine these days they're trying to solve, is getting localized medicine to areas, because everything is just kind of like the anti-venom, right? Like you can get here, and you're going to get anti-venom, but the anti-venom is going to course through your whole body. And it's, eventually you're going to need enough to start working in this area. So yeah, it was just kind of these things where, and that's what I'm saying, the ethics of it. And there's going to be bad actors, man. There's just, there's bad scientists, there's bad businessmen, there's bad soldiers, there's bad,
Is there some kind of like worldwide science organization that oversees all this, or does each country pretty much do their own thing?
No, there are, the scientific community, obviously it needs to be all peer reviewable science. So there are standards and organizations depending on what you're so like right now, because data analytics is a big, thing for all these AI platforms and stuff. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but there is it's like a European and US. I don't know if there's more countries that are involved with it, but it's kind of like because obviously with data and putting it in a machine to give you results, you can feed the machine data and program it to give you what you want. You know what I'm saying? So you can make it seem like, hey, if I put in patient data XYZ and I get out this result, my technology works, right? Put in patient data, get out XYZ result. Well, then these data scientists will go in and see exactly the data. So what they do is they created a standard of transparency and ways of like how this data needs to be set up, so that way everybody can look in and make sure like it's not being manipulated. So there are, like I said, organizations that are trying to, and like one thing that is an easy example is the standards of weight and measurement. Because so like, there are standards, like there are conventions for scientists, like, hey, gravity is 9.8 meters per second square, like these conventions, right? And scientists every so often, test them with our better technologies. We get more digits on these numbers, kinds of things. So they're always working to, make things more even. Even's not the right word, but more transparent and, on the same field, on the same playing field, and making sure everybody's understands the same things, and everybody underneath the same kind of umbrella understands that these are the ways that we're trying to get stuff done.
So Ricardo, you just did an interview for your PhD, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that process? Why a PhD? And like, what's your vision for yourself as a scientist? Like, what's your goal as far as that?
Well, that's a whole nother crazy story too, man. My life is so full circle. I mean, like, it's so crazy how this is all playing out. So yeah, I applied for PhD programs. Most of the deadlines were December 1st of last year. And I applied for 5 programs at UW and 2 programs in Texas. All of the programs at UW rejected me, and I got to interview for one program in Texas last week, the Ph.D. in human genetics program at University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And it's a brand new program, good opportunity, whatever. And so, yeah, it was a kind of painful, long process. And a lot of the UW programs rejected me pretty quick. Within the first 2 or 3 weeks, I think 3 of the 5 had rejected me. And so 2 of their programs, over the last, 6 weeks or so rejected me.
Do they tell you why they reject you?
They very broadly tell you, they're like, hey, thanks. It was very competitive. But the funny one for me was genome science, my rejection from genome science, because it was literally just like, it almost, the way they worded it was just like, we just want like groomed academics here, was the way it was. Because it was like, hey, thanks for applying. A lot of our applicants have a ton of research under their belt. And they're also, how did they word it? It was like, they're also very academically prepared or something like that. Like basically these kids, or these students, I should say, these students don't have any gaps in their academic career, like graduated top 10 of their class, went to college, got their degrees, went to masters, got their masters, and now, straight into PhD. So maybe like 24-year-old students into these programs. And so, so that's, like I said, that's what they made it sound like, a very academically prepared. So they just made it sound like, hey, these kids had it. And the one hope I did have for one of their programs was a program where they're on their student profiles. Some of their students were talked about, I went backpacking for a year and I took a little break. So that was a program that was the last one to reject me. Basically, it was like my last hope. I was like, oh, if anything, this will be the one program that I will get an interview for UW, but I didn't even get to interview for that one. And so it was funny, because when I did the interview for for the genetics program in Texas, at the very beginning of the interview, they asked me, or they told me, thanks for doing this, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, no, thank you for letting me do the interview, because the struggle of any PhD student is you apply to a bunch of programs in the hopes to get to this point to do the interview. So thank you. So I do the interview, it's going great. And then the guy leading the interview kind of tosses it up, and he asks, everybody who, lets them know, ask him questions. It's free time. And so one of the first questions I get asked is, well, at the beginning of the interview, you said you applied to other programs. How do we fall in that mix? And I'm just like, oh man, like you're literally asking me like how I rank you with the other programs, right? And I was like, well, I applied to 5 programs at UW because it's right up the road for me, and 2 in Texas based on the recommendation from this other scientist. So I hold you in high regard because I only applied to 2 programs in Texas based on the recommendation of this other scientist. And so, it got crazier from there. And so I feel like I got a really good chance of getting, maybe not this year, ideally this year. But if not, hopefully, because it's a brand new program. They're allowing 7 students per year for the first 4 years until they get to a steady state of about 25 students graduating per year. So it's only 7 spots available, and so to be one of the first 7 would be really lucky. And I feel like I've got a good shot because at the end of the interview they asked, do I have anything else I want to say? And I said, I'm glad I'm being considered as being one of the first students in this program, because if I'm selected, I would love to go in there and get it prepared and help like take the punches and get it ready for the students after me, right? Because I'll be one of the first 7. So I'd be honored to help. It's not going to be perfect, right? Especially as a new program, as we're going to have our bumps and our hiccups and stuff like that. So I told him, I was like, look, I'm not expecting perfection from a new program. So I'd be happy to be one of the first students to help take, to ride along on this bumpy ride. And then the guy leading it was like, oh no, that's great. Cause we understand that too. And, for them, they really want students who are going to, he's like, this is what he said. He's like, we need self-motivated students. We need people who we know we're going to put in and give these good opportunities to, and they're going to finish because they're a brand new program. So if they put students in and they don't finish, they're going to get their funding cut. But if they put new students in and they're graduating a bunch of them, then they're going to get more funding. So he's like, man, it's very important at this stage. It's a brand new program. We need students who are self-motivated and are going to finish. And I'm just like, oh no, yeah, I'll finish it. I'll definitely get it done. And so I just feel like in my life, man, it's been a combination. It's like entrepreneurship, right? It's luck and timing, so I got lucky that I ended up as a research scientist of virology. I've been there a year, got the experience I needed, and now I'm getting lucky the timing of a brand new program in Texas getting started, and them really wanting people who they know they can count on to finish.
So what do you see yourself as in the future? Like, you're gonna be like, do you want to like lead some type of high visibility research lab at Harvard, or like what's your goal for there? Like what's your
Yeah, I mean, my goal has always been, and this is where the weird full circle part comes around, because when I graduated in 2016, right before I graduated, I met this guy. I might have shared this story the last time. I don't remember. But basically I met this, long story short, I met this other scientist, and it was really weird. When I first met, my eyes first laid eyes on him, I was like, damn, I know you from somewhere. This is really weird. But I was like, it was that I know you from somewhere feeling times 10,000, right? That's the only way I can describe it, because I've had that feeling before, but this is not that feeling. That's the only way I can describe it. And so I was like, man, I had this weird feeling. Well, later in the day, he's like, hey, I'm going to give a talk about how I grew up poor, single mom, blah, 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 and ended up at Harvard, because he was a researcher at Harvard at the time, just visiting my university. And so he's like, man, I'm going to give this talk later in the day. I'd appreciate it if I came to my talk. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to go to his talk. And when he's done, I'm just going to approach him, ask him for his email. And then I'll send him an email asking him, hey, do I know you from somewhere? I had this weird feeling. So I went to the talk, and when it was done, I went up, I approached him. And before I could even say anything, he goes, hey, man, do you have an older brother or something? I feel like I know you from somewhere. And my mind melted, because like I had that feeling of I know you from somewhere, but he reciprocated it to me before I could even say anything. And so, yeah, man, I just, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, like it was such a powerful feeling that he felt it too. And so, yeah, I was like, no, I don't have an older brother. We talked a little bit, and there's like no connection. So it was really weird. And ever since then, he's my co-founder of the biotech startup now. So we've been, connected ever since then. And now he's in Texas doing research at Texas A&M, Kingsville. And he's been telling me, he's like, hey, University of Texas is trying to poach me. They're trying to make me an offer, to pull me away from Texas A&M. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. So after the interview, I text him. I'm like, hey, interview went great. Blah, blah. He's like, hey, do you have time for a call? I was like, yeah, sure. So I called him, and we're talking. And he's like, I told him about the interview and how well it went. He's like, oh, that's cool. And I thought about it, and I was like, wait a minute, how's your offer going? Because University of Texas is supposed to make you an offer, right? And he's like, how's your offer? He's like, oh, well, they're still putting the packet together for my offer. And then when he said that, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, so if they make you an offer to be a professor at University of Texas, are you going to be a professor in this human genetics program? And he's like, yeah, man. Yeah. I was like, what? Like, no way. Because like when I first met him,
talk about stuff lining it up.
Yeah, that's all I wanted when I first met him. I was like, man, I don't know you. I don't know what you do, but just this weird feeling that I had. All I know is I want you to put me under your wing, and I just want to learn from you. And now here we are,
Oh my goodness.
What is this? 6 years later, man. Full circle. 6 years later, he's going to more than likely end up there, and hopefully me too. So,
well, if he gets hired, I'm sure he's going to have a big influence on who gets accepted.
Well, yeah. And that was the cool thing, during the interview, as I'm talking to, when these other professors are introducing themselves, talking to me about the research they do, one of the professors was like, yeah, I use CRISPR to genetically engineer possums. I think it was possums. I use CRISPR to genetically engineer possums to be resistant to Zika virus. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. And then he's like, and then I also work with, Jacob Galan with snake venom. So like my co-founder, he's like, I also work with this scientist on snake venom stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And so like he name dropped him. And that's why I was like, later, I was like, oh, I know Jacob too, just because he wrote a letter of recommendation for me for the program. And so yeah, it's just kind of crazy how I kind of was like, I was like, wait a minute. Like, they're trying to hire you, but are they going to hire you for this program in the Valley? It's like, yeah, man, I'm going to be there. Wow. It's kind of weird, like 6 years later for it to all come back down to this, and me ultimately getting what I wanted, and it was kind of funny because in 2016, when I met him, he was at Harvard, and I literally left after I graduated not long after. And after like within a year of me moving up, he moved back down from Harvard to Texas, where I was. And I was like, man, in my mind, I never thought you were going to move back to Texas. Like, I thought you were going to be a Harvard, working there forever, but now he loves snake venom, like that's his where he started. But that's the cool thing about it was like, he started doing snake venom research, got his Ph.D. in biochemistry, and then did postdoc work in Canada, learning about cancer. And then that's how he got the job as a research fellow at Massachusetts General Hospital for Harvard, doing more cancer stuff. And then after 3 or 4 years there at Harvard, he's like, back to Venom. So he moved down to Texas and went back to Venom. And now he's going to end up back in the Valley doing human genetics,
Being your
cancer
professor,
stuff.
being your
Yeah.
professor. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Can you talk about this? I think a lot of people don't get this part right, or how like you might take this one small step, like for you, you took the temp job, right? But what you don't see, you take this small temp job, and then 10 years later, you'll continue to be a PhD, right?
Yeah.
I think people, don't realize the steps, a process to go through, right? It's like, it isn't, nothing's overnight, right? On the career, you just not overnight. Some people forget the steps, the journey, like I like to say, like Apple didn't become Apple 8 years, right?
Yeah. That's an interesting thing about like the how I built this podcast, it's a podcast about, like major businesses and how they got started. And like, I always feel like most businesses have been started from 2000 and after, other than like Coke, Ford, and like the Harley Davidson, and like these businesses that we know just like growing up have been around forever. But I felt like most businesses have only been around for 20, 30 years. But then you go to listen to these podcasts and you dive into the business world and like, no, these businesses have been around for 50 plus years. You just took them a long time to get to where they, you know what I'm saying? Like it takes a very, very long time. And so, yeah, it's human nature, man. I think it's human nature. We all, especially these days where it's a results driven, click it now, get me what I want now kind of thing, so to do anything worthwhile, it takes a lot of hard work and time. And yeah, it's just, all this instant self gratification stuff. And then believe me, I feel like that all the time too. It's like, man, I wish I could just like make things happen faster. I was like, why doesn't things happen faster? But it's just the day-to-day grind that you have to just keep pushing forward, and eventually things. And that's kind of funny for me, I've been working on this book for years and this phone case stuff for years. And I'm literally, the book's out on Amazon now. So like that journey's done other than me promoting it and working on the documentary and audiobooks and all the other parts of that go along with it. But like for the bulk of it, the journey's done. And for the same thing for my patent, I've been awarded the utility patent. I found somebody who can help me get this done. We just have our small hiccups right now. We're pretty much right there. So it's kind of weird that these things that I've been pushing for years and years and years and waiting and hoping for them to like start generating revenue, because they've just been money sucks for years, And it's not even about the revenue. It's just like, I just want to start getting like, I've been pushing it forward so much. I would like to get something, starting to come back in return, whether that's monetary or just hanging out with you doing your podcast or doing whatever, it's like, man, I've been grinding for years at this stuff and I'd like to start reaping a little bit of the reward, whether that be, I definitely don't want any fame. So just buy my stuff and, throw my picture away or something. I don't know.
So let's go back to the book. So I have no idea how the book process works, but it seemed like you combine writing a book with startup methodology. Like it's like you'd use the MVP model, right? Because you release an alpha version of your book, the beta version. So I have no idea if that's what it has actually done, or are you kind of combine? Did you combine like startup stuff and MVP stuff with writing the book, publishing the book?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, the recommendations as a self-publisher is get it done as cheap, as fast as possible. That's a big thing with Renee Bob. She's like 90 days or less, you can pump your book out. And you really can, depending on the content of the book and whatnot. But it's just been this kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe. It was, like I said, there's lots of resources online. Like Reddit was such a super powerful resource because, the self-publishing subreddit and all the subreddits for all the things you're interested in. You can learn, and it was really cool because I'm doing all this research, learning about how these people sell hundreds of thousands of books and do these crazy things. And I'm like, man, it sounds like it's a hard thing to do. Like you're reading about it and they talk about, it's not that hard. You just got to do this. And I sold 20,000 books in a month or something. And then I meet Renee Bob, the self-publishing lady. And she literally is describing to me how she implements the things that I read online, and was like, that sounds doable, but how, And so to meet Renee and have her as my book mentor, man, like Bunker Labs, thank you, Bunker Labs, like of all the things at a minimum, Bunker Labs is such a great organization, but just, of course, networking with other entrepreneurs. And because that was always my biggest worry, man, like the phone case stuff was always a hassle, but I have this book and I don't know what to do. Like, yeah, I'm doing all the research online, but it'd be really great to have somebody bring me under their wing and kind of show me the ropes. And then that the first, like, I don't know if it was the first or second meeting when Renee Bob had actually joined us, and she was like, "Hey, I do book publishing. And this is." I'm like, "What? Like, this is perfect." And so, yeah, I learned a lot from Renee in terms of getting it done. But it is kind of a lean startup process because like a lot of times, we're limited on our budget, so you got to try to do things as cheap and easy as possible. And the most important thing I could say in terms of the book and kind of the entrepreneurship side of it is, like any business, you need to funnel your customers. So that's the most important thing in the publishing world. It's called a lead magnet, right? So, like, let's say in like the consumer product world, a lead magnet might be a 15% off your purchase if you sign up to my newsletter, right? You sign up to my newsletter and you're going to get a coupon for whatever percent off. That's a lead magnet to get people to drop their emails, so that way you can kind of keep blowing them up, like, hey, they fall down your funnel. And in the self-publishing world, it's, if you're going to write multiple books, it's making your first book free, so that way people can read it for free and then fall in love with you or not. And then, you funnel them down by charging them for follow-up books. And for me, like someone who's not going to write a ton of books, that's why, I am on my website, you sign up for the newsletter and you get the introduction for free, right? So people sign up, on my newsletter, they get the introduction for free. And then they also get the newsletter and get to follow up, get the insider info on what I'm doing kind of in the background. So yeah, in a sense, like, because they're all funnels, right? We all got to funnel people to what we want them to see and we get to. So it's just kind of the different aspects of the consumer product world, the business world, or the art side of the coin.
So what's the goal of the book? Is the goal to, like, bring awareness to your army, to your whole life, to 5-2? Said, I know you're using to raise money for different organizations. What's the goal for the book?
The goal for the book is really, like you said, just to share the story. Not so much my story. I mean, it is my story, but I just wanted to share my story because it was so crazy, man. Like, not knowing I was going to deploy until the day I left. I didn't know I was deploying until the day I left. I got my MRI results because I was hurt for 4 months. I got my MRI results the day before I left, and I didn't even know I was leaving until the day I left. I had like 6 hours to get ready. They're like, "Hey, you're deploying today." And I'm like, "Well, I need orders to take to my apartment," because, like, I didn't even have deployment orders. So I was like, "Hey, I can't just leave my apartment, guys. Come on, give me something." And so, yeah, it was just this crazy experience. And then when I got overseas, I have a chapter in my book called Handicap by Disarmament. So when I got overseas, they took my rifle away from me. And yeah, they basically disarmed me, right? Because here I am, a highly specialized trained sniper to use this weapon system. And one of the people in my company, obviously it had to have been a very high up person, right? I was like, sniper team has too much firepower. How about you give them your rifle? And yeah, let's make our sniper team less effective. And so, yeah, man, it was just this crazy experience. And that's why I want to share my side of the story. But my side of the story is, I only did about 4 or 5 months of the year-long deployment. Because, like I said, I didn't know I was deploying to the day I left. Like, then I got back and learned I should have never deployed to begin with, because ortho never cleared me. And so, it was a wild ride for me. And it was like, my story is a wild ride, but all those guys who were there for the whole year, they're the ones that need to tell their story. So,
because many of them didn't get, like, the Purple Hearts or come entry badge. A lot of them getting what did not receive what they deserve, right?
Yeah. Well, because of all the nonsense with the leadership and that those guys killing civilians, it kind of
tainted the whole unit.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's kind of shitty that, maybe 30 people out of
thousands.
I would say, considering the brigade, probably 50 people out of 5,000. So what, 1%? 1% of them is gonna, ruin it for all of us. So yeah, man, that's kind of what drove me to tell the story. And it's like I said, if you go Google search 5th Brigade, all you're going to find info on is the kill team, or those idiots killing civilians, and the bad leadership and what they did wrong or whatever. And that's part of the story. It's a very small part of the story, but the real story is these dudes who were doing such heroic, incredible things without, metal detectors and without regard for their own safety. And so yeah, like I said, man, hearing these guys' stories brought me to tears. I'm like, damn, like now we need, I always wanted to make the documentary, but hearing their stories, I'm like, nah, the same way with my book before, like now none of this documentary is going to get made because these guys need to share their stories. Because yeah, man, like I said, it's such a dream. And that's the big part of why, you know, it's funny because remember how I was talking to you while we were eating about, you know, doing this other podcast coming up and how that other host and whatever. When I was talking to that guy, he's like, well, how come you didn't get it published by like a real publisher? Like, why are you self-publishing it? And I was like, well, because when you self-publish, you have all the control, right? You go with a publisher, they get creative control because you sign away the rights, right? You're going to get a small royalty. They do all the work. They what X, Y, Z. And so I told him, I was like, look, man, I didn't even bother shopping it around to book companies or whatever, because I don't want them to change the story, right? I want to tell the story of how it happened. And I don't want that to change. But I listened to Sacrifice by Michelle Black, and she talks about the really screwed up shit and the lies of the army that involved the cover up of what happened with all that stuff. And she's putting the truth out there, man. And it's a powerful, powerful book. And I'm like, wow, she talks about her investigations that she's doing and interviewing the people that were there and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, like I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to share the story the way I wanted to share it, that I self-published it. But when I was talking to this guy, he's like, no, man, we can get you published. Like, we're going to, you know, I'll connect you with these guys, and they, you know, they're published authors. And so, yeah, and like I said, I was never really for it. But now that and it was funny because I told him, I was like, you know what, man, because I'm not pocketing any money from the book. Like, I don't care if a publisher picks me up because I'm not going to pocket any of it anyway. So I was like, you know what, if I can agree to get a publisher to, you know, take 70, you know, take whatever huge percent they're going to take, but then leave a huge percent to come back to these men to make the documentary, the audiobook. And for me, you know, another reason I'm thinking about it more is because I do want to write more books now. Like, I never thought I'd be.
You got the writing bug now?
Yeah, I never thought I'd be a writer, man. But now there's for sure 2 more books I want to write, a fiction and a nonfiction. And the fiction book I will share, the nonfiction I won't. But the fiction book I want to write is, well, do I want to share this? Which
Of course you do.
Right now.
Of course you do.
I don't know, man. Do I want to share these? No, well, I'll save the fiction. I'll share the nonfiction. Right. So the nonfiction book I want to write, because it all goes back to that water quality stuff, right? And so I want to write a book that is in a sense what that Seattle, that English Ph.D, you know, UW Husky, whenever I sent that email out, kind of what she suggested at first. I want to write a book talking about the water issue and the water we were drinking and how I think it was poisoning us and how I know it was poisoning us. And I also want to write it, like co-write it with someone who's been doing research or investigative journalistic type stuff in how plastic leaching into water makes us sick. So that way, the way I'm thinking about writing it is, you know, basically the problem, you know, service members and people in general drinking contaminated water, polluted with whether that be lead, you know, like in Flint, or plastic, like with our example. And just like a prediction of, this is the problem, this is what we can expect, and this is how we should try to mitigate the, you know, the problem in the future when it starts to rear its ugly head. Because like I said, you know, for my example, it would be drinking the crap water that was overseas to what we can expect now that we know that these things that leach from plastic mimic hormones. And so we know that like hormones in our body, you know, aren't good, right? Unless it's like properly dosed and done right by doctors. So we're just drinking these hormonal cocktails and we don't know what's going to happen. So yeah. So that's basically one of the books I want to write. And then the other book, the fiction book, I think I'll keep under wraps.
Do you have a schedule for this yet? Like when you gonna start writing
and
all that kind of
stuff?
The
schedule can definitely speed up if I get turned into a real published author, you know, because at that point it's my job, right? Like, yeah, I can promote this book, but at the same time I can work on my other books. And I do definitely want to do it sooner rather than later. But yeah, it all depends on life and how everything goes.
And talk about how you're publicizing your current book. What are you doing to help put the word out about that?
Well, I'm doing these podcasts, and, you know, I got the newsletter and, you know, Facebook groups, and just promoting it on social media mostly. And, you know, I have been doing like public speaking gigs when I was in Texas. I did one in October. I was supposed to do one in November, December, but I was going through so much stuff in December that when I went to Texas, I was just like, you know what, this is my vacation. Like I'm just gonna enjoy my time.
Are you able, like, doing like
Excuse me.
publishing stuff, any publicity through the Army related channels?
I actually reached out and tried to see what the deal is with like AFEs and getting on post, but they really just deal with published. You know
Okay.
what I'm saying? Like, and that's the downside of being a self-published author. And that's one thing Renee Bob told me. She was like, you know, if you want to get your book in bookstores, you really just have to go to independently owned bookstores,
Mhm.
because to get in Barnes and Noble and like these other,
Yeah, I'd be like, okay.
yeah, Books and More is like one of the other books places. So yeah, to get into those places, you need to be like an actual published author that's going to get distribution by a major company kind of thing.
So how many chapters are you in your book?
40 chapters, but they're all relatively, you know, quick chapters to read.
Here's a question for you. Someone says, Ricardo, man, I really want to read your book. I want to learn about it. I don't say I just have the time. What one chapter should I read?
Ooh, probably one. What chapter should you read that might
Like
want
catches
you to read more, or what chapter should you read?
You only have time to read one chapter.
Hmm.
That one chapter kind of catch the essence of everything.
That's a tough question. I think, and yeah, I have to say, the chapter called "The Reality Check."
Reality check.
Yeah. Just because that was the first. You know, we had already been in Afghanistan for like a month. You know, we were on CAF, Kandahar Airfield, the big NATO base, safe and protected from all them, you know, all the amazing weapons of war we've created. But, and so, you know, we're there on CAF, safe and you know, whatever, for a month, prepping to go out to our FOB. And so once we got to the FOB, man, within, you know, the first couple weeks, a lot of guys lost their lives. But probably within that first week of us being there, you know, was when we took our first casualties. I almost lost my life that day. And it was kind of surreal to go out on mission, almost lose my life that day because we were in a major firefight, and then come back from a very, you know, I was exhausted. It was a long day. And then to come back and learn that my brother in arms, the other 240 gunner, when I was the 240 gunner, that he had lost his life. You know, that he was that they weren't even sure what happened to him. You know, they thought he might have been kidnapped. They were pretty sure he was dead, but they thought they might have had his body drug off. And but they weren't sure. You know, and at the time it was just weird. Like I said, you know, such a weird day, right? It's the first firefight I'd ever been in, and it was crazy. And yeah, so then I got back and I was already so tired. And it was just, it was a crazy night because I was on my commander's vehicle. You know, I was a sniper, so I'm his asset. I was on the commander's vehicle. And when we were in Afghanistan, they told us they had like ropes, you know, on the vehicle, and they wanted air guards to rope themselves to the vehicle because if the vehicle got blown up, they didn't want soldiers to get flung from the vehicle. I said, screw that. If we get blown up, I want to get flung from the vehicle, right? I don't want some rope attached to me. Like, what if I get flung and it's going to like rip my body in half? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, I felt like I'd have better chances of living if I was going to get flung. And so, man, my commander got mad at me. I was so tired. I mean, we had climbed mountains or giant hills all morning long and did that firefight all afternoon long. And so by the evening, it's just basically us snipers on the commander's vehicle and the commander. And my sniper buddies were asleep in the vehicle. It was a long day. And actually the other lower sniper, not the sergeant, but the lower enlisted guy on the sniper team, he had been sick that whole day. He was throwing up all morning. Like it was a horrible day for us. And then I'm out there, like I'm on top of the vehicle. Like normally the air guard's supposed to be standing up, their body halfway out. I was just laying back, you know, knees up, you know, pulling security. Like I'm fucking, I don't know, gangster on this vehicle. You know what I'm saying? Just like chilling, you know, I'm tired, just relaxing. Commander got after me, Perez, get back in the vehicle, you know, blah, blah. Well, we get back to the base and thankfully we're on the commander's vehicle because he is special enough to just get driven right up to the tents. And so thankfully we didn't have to do all the extra down gear and drag our gear. So we were already tired. And then I get to the tent and on my bed, there's like somebody's crap, like literally head to toe, somebody's crap is just strewn all over my bed. And I didn't even care whose it was. It could have been the sergeant major of the brigades or whatever, you know. It's like, I just grabbed it and I dunked it. And I was like, man, I'm so tired. I ain't going to deal with this right now. So I just dunked it. And then I just sat on the edge of the bed, man. And I was just like, decompressing, thinking about all the shit that happened in that day, decompressing before trying to catch some Z's. And then one of the guys from my platoon comes up and he's like, hey, uh, Tom's gone. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, we're pretty sure Tom's dead, like KIA. And the guy who told me, man, I couldn't believe it. The source wasn't, but then he was like, well, yeah, the sergeant so-and-so was the one who put the word out. And I'm like, oh, well, now it's not just coming from you, right? Now you're saying a sergeant said it. So I'm like, whatever, I'm too tired for this tonight. And then I woke up the next morning and I looked over to that area of where that platoon where he was in, the guy who lost his life, Tom. I looked into that area of where he was in, and the platoon was just huddled in a circle, and you could just tell by the body language and just the atmosphere of how everything felt that he was gone. And then I'll never forget the platoon sergeant just yelling at the man, like, we gotta fucking drop, like obviously, everybody loved him, and it's, hurts, when you lose guys like that. And so he was just doing his best to motivate his dudes, like, yeah, somebody just died yesterday, but we got to go back out again, like that's our job. And so, yeah, man, it was kind of like, for me, like I said, it was the reality check, because I almost died that day, and my good friend did die that day, and then another soldier died that day too. So it wasn't just him, but, and of course from there it just kind of got exponentially worse until they took us out of that area, and then that's when the casualties stopped, when we got relieved.
Man, that's some tough stuff, right?
Yeah. So I was saying and then it's funny because that chapter is called the reality check, and the next chapter is called "Can we check again?" ? Because yeah, man, it was a rough deployment.
Yeah. Do you still keep in touch with people from 5-2?
I talk to one guy pretty regularly, mostly because he's been on this kind of crazy decade-long self-destruction tour since getting out. He got blown up overseas. My platoon, right? My platoon, another one of our guys from our platoon died. So, of course, he basically died in his arms. You try to help him, try to save him. A very traumatic thing to experience. So, and it doesn't help. As soon as he got blown up, the army took him away from us and started feeding him Ambien and opiates. And so, yeah, it was kind of the start of the slippery slide for him. They isolated him. And I mean, he was partially to blame for that isolation because of the reason and how it happened. But at the same time, like, yeah, he ended up isolating himself at WTB, which is like Warrior Transition Brigade on Fort Lewis. He got thrown into that instead of put back in our unit, because a lot of the guys that got blown up overseas just got put on rear detachment for our unit. But he didn't, because he had to go above and beyond what a specialist should have to do to help a sergeant. And he helped a sergeant get out of Afghanistan that was being mentally tortured, basically. So that's why they shunned him away from us, because at some point they realized, like, we can't let this soldier go back to his unit because they will mistreat him if we do. So yeah, I talk to him as much as I can, and really just him, man. It kind of makes me sad, because when I got out, I did keep in contact with quite a few guys, because we all lived in this area still. And then when I moved back to Texas and started going to college, it's really when we started to, not keep in contact as much. And it's kind of just been that way ever since. The years go by pretty quick, and, a lot of them still stayed in the military and did their thing. And, or, a lot of the guys that I served with were stop lost, kind of weird that they, technically didn't even have to deploy with their contractual obligation, but Army was like, nope, you're trained, you're going. And then, so that was what was kind of eye-opening to me. Like I said, talking to a lot of these guys that I hadn't talked to in over 10 years from when we served overseas, and making sure everything was good for my book and accurate, and just being like, man, like, God dang, I haven't talked to you in forever, and it's so weird, but it's kind of like those weird things. I'm sure, being a vet, like, you can go 10, 20 years without talking to some of these guys, and you talk to them and it's just like you never skipped a day. It's weird.
Like you seen them yesterday.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's a beautiful thing.
So, Ricardo, obviously you've seen a lot, been through a lot. You're doing a lot now, your entrepreneurship, writing a book, research scientist. How do you take care of yourself?
That's funny, because I literally told them in the interview for my Ph.D. program that I do a lot of soul searching. And which is why I told you, I was like, man, when I had the thought, like, even if I get into UW, like, chances are I'm probably going to have to do something in Texas, because I just don't have the support here to let me properly attack this thing the way I want to. And so, yeah, man, I mean, get outdoors is, I love going fishing, trying to catch the salmon, hearing the rivers run in the creeks. That's why I love this place. Oh, I love going gold panning, going looking for gold in the rivers and just getting outdoors. And there's also, I also like to just have quiet time. I like a lot of times on this commute, or I can't say a lot, but you know, I'd say multiple times a month, I just drive home with no music on. I just lost in my thought,
You know what?
self.
People don't realize the importance of that, right? Everyone says, listen to podcasts, listen to music, do whatever. But I think it's so important, at least 30 minutes, at least once a week, 30 minutes, just go and just like zone out, right? Just nothing in your brain. You'd be amazed how many ideas and stuff pop up out of nowhere you would never think about because you have like total blank space.
Yeah. And I think that's why it, the way people act these days, whether that be on social media or in person, like it's, people don't do that anymore. We have, because growing up, I grew up on a ranch, like I said, with 3 channels, mostly static, video games that were 8-bit, not the most fun, not the most deep. It's like I grew up with just shooting guns and wandering my ranch with my own thoughts as a kid. And so, man, like it hurt because I was a young kid and I'd see these adults doing things and I'm always wondering, like, what? Why are they doing this? That can't be right. Like, why are they doing these things? And yeah, for a long time, like my sister and I were the adults and our parents were the kids, like they're always bickering and fighting and acting weird. Like, no, you don't do that. You don't act like that. And so, yeah, it's just these days there's so many distractions of social media, everything at the click, instant of, so nobody really wants, I can't say they don't want to, but they don't proactively try to get themselves to. And I think a lot of people are afraid, because it's like some of my buddies that are dealing with, alcohol abuse or whatever. I talk to them about using weed or cannabis and edibles, as a way to kind of battle your demons, and so they always tell me like, no, man, I can't do that. I get so paranoid or I start to like freak out, like I start to think, about the things I did in the past and it bothers me. I'm like, well, that's kind of part of, like, you got to think about those things and reflect on
You got to kind
them.
of confront
Yeah.
it.
Like
You
you
got
got
to
to,
confront it.
yeah, you got to battle your demons, like it's an important part of growing as a human being. You got to understand, um, you reflect on the times when you felt like you were right and ultimately were wrong and kind of remember, like, damn, it's weird because a lot of times I meet people and I have to, I push back because a lot of times people say such blanket statements. It's always just like, they'll say something. I'm like, oh, like that's a super blanket statement. Like you just can't, it's kind of weird because, I'm always trying to be cautious about that because I know I do say things, but I always try to be, once I catch myself, I'm like, well, it's kind of a blanket statement, but X, Y, Z. So, yeah, it's just, like I said, I think it's the quiet time. And for me, that's really what got me out of my depression. And it's all mental, it's super cliche to say, but it's all in our head. We have the power to change our mindset and get done what we, do what we need to
Yeah.
do or get what.
And most depression comes from stuff that happened in our past, right? And like, isn't you would think it's in the past, it can affect you, but it affects so many people because they can't get over it for whatever reason.
Yeah. And the most powerful example I can give of that is my depression that I pulled myself out of in 2017. And it was I was more depressed than when I was in the army. It's kind of crazy to say, but for me, it was like, life is not going the way I want it to go. And now I have kids. In the army, I didn't have kids and life sucked, but at least I didn't have kids to drag through the suck with me, And so I had got to a point in my life, 5 years of military service, 5 years of college, to where I felt like, man, I should be able to provide for my family now with a good job. And so when that didn't happen, I couldn't get a job and I got depressed because I was kind of, a decade of grinding my ass off, military and school. And now I'm kind of sitting at home, taking care of kids in these 4 walls. And man, I cherished it. I'd rather have my kids with me than anybody else and raising them at those, critical stages. But it drove me crazy. And then literally my oldest daughter got into kinder, got pneumonia around, the fall. And I mean, I was so depressed. I was such a shitty person, man. Like I was like, this dark cloud following me everywhere. And I was always yelling and depressed and like angry, and I would yell at my kids like they were soldiers, like they were babies, and I'm yelling at them like they're soldiers, and I know that happens a lot in the military realm, and it seems like it's an unacceptable thing to do, but and especially for me, man, because I can yell like a lot of times I could yell louder than most of those sergeants that I served with. So I got some pipes on me, man. I can yell pretty loud. And so when my daughter got sick, and my wife had always been telling me, you're shitty. You're always like, obviously you're being shitty. You're always depressed. You're always mad. And I knew it, but like, what can I do? I got nothing. But my daughter got sick, super sick, on the brink of hospitalization. And that night, man, I was just in my garage, enjoying my vape pen, just enjoying a little bit of vape and thinking about how shitty I am. And then thinking about how my current state is detrimental to my daughter's current state, right? Like me being shitty is not going to help her get better. I'm not going to help her feel better. And the way I was thinking about it was like, I just need to fake it till she gets better. Like I didn't have any long-term goals or like, yeah, I'm going to do all this mental health hoopla to get better, whatever. I was just like in the moment thinking really deep about how I just need to fake it, right? Just fake, put a smile on my face, be cheery, pretend like just force it out of myself. And for 2 weeks, right? 2-3 weeks, maybe a month till she completely recovers. And then when that happens, I can just go back to being shitty. Right? I mean, that was kind of my kind of shitty mindset. But the crazy thing about it was like, while I was thinking these thoughts in my garage, I could feel the world around me changing. It was the craziest thing. And like I said, I didn't have any like grand scheme of like, oh, I'm going to do this forever. It was just like, yo, I'm going to do this for now until my daughter gets better. And then we'll take it from there. Like maybe I'll be better, maybe I'll be less depressed or whatever. But the craziest thing was just thinking those thoughts and literally feeling like the world was changing around me. And then within like a week, right? So I did that, walked out of that garage, like, freaking set in my ways of I'm going to do this, and for a couple of weeks or however long it takes her to get better. And then I'm pretty sure it was like 2 days later, maybe even the day after, the Seattle Times emailed me with that opportunity.
Okay, I remember that.
Yeah. And so I was just like, whoa, like, is this the start? Like the world was changing around me and the universe, because I had emailed the Seattle Times the year before. I had seen that ad the year before.
That's your first speaking thing,
right?
Yeah,
yeah. So I had seen the ad the year before to do the speaking gig, and they didn't pick me. So I'm just like, oh, I never thought I'd going to hear back from them again. And then a year later, it was almost like the universe knew that I needed that little pick me up to help me push myself forward. I got a random email from the Seattle Times saying like, hey, we still have your submission from last year. We like it. Are you still interested in doing it? Oh yeah, I got something to work towards now, right? And now I got 5 weeks of preparing for a public speaking gig. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, it worked out because like I had those thoughts. I felt the universe changing around me. And then a couple of days later, I had that opportunity, and now I had 5 weeks to focus and work on something. And that's what pulled me from the depression too, right? Because now I had something to focus on. But when I was getting ready to give the talk and get done, I was like, dang, like there's not going to be another magical email that comes, right? There's not going to be another like, hey, come give a talk, come do this. Like, so I was like, man, I need to do something, because if not, I'm going to go back into my depressed state, and I don't want that. So I just started doing automotive work and picked up sewing, and I know how to do a little bit of sewing and stuff now. And, but, redid everything on my minivan, from the brake system all the way, from suspension, lower control arms, shocks, struts, exhaust, everything, man. I completely redid that van, and even went on to the cosmetics, redid the headliner, like just keeping my hands and my mind busy. Cause I know that if I choose to wallow in my shit, I'm going to be depressed. Like if I choose to not use my hands, like they say, idle hands are the devil's, whatever, right? Like you got idle hands, man, you're going to be depressed. We're human beings. We need a, whether that's
some kind of purpose or something.
Yeah. And then just, like I said,
a reason to wake up. So
yeah. It doesn't even have to be glorious, like mechanic work and sewing, and that's what got me by. And then I was like, you know what, with all the other stuff that's happening, that's when I started writing my book. And it was just like a momentum builder. And that's why when I stopped writing the book, I was like, man, now I got nothing, but I don't want to have nothing. I need to follow this pattern, right? I just need to create more momentum to keep me going.
Have you thought about doing a TEDx talk to help push out your book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did apply to the last TEDx Seattle event, and they rejected me. So, I mean, I have tried. So,
So we were talking about Matt Rama earlier, right?
yeah, yeah.
So Rama, I could be wrong, but one of his good friends has some kind of connection with TEDx.
Oh, nice.
Not TEDx Seattle, but the one north of here, I think. I'm not sure. But get with Matt.
Okay.
He has one of his friends is somehow connected with TEDx.
Nice.
I remember Matt doing some kind of photography for a TEDx event that his friend put together or something, right?
Yeah, and I don't blame them for not, liking my talk. And when I submitted, I was not expecting them to literally want your talk in the submission. I thought like you'd give them because kind of like what I did with the Seattle Times. I gave them a 2-minute long phone call pitch or like a real quick, hey, my teacher saved me. I was going to drop out, plants, the end. You know what I'm saying? So when I did the TEDx application, working through it, they're like, okay, now attach your talk. And I'm like, oh shit, I haven't even I know what I want to talk about, but I haven't literally planned it out or wrote it out.
Because I thought TEDx helped you put your talk together.
Well, yeah, that's what I thought too. Because that's basically what it was with the Seattle Times. Like I did have that generic idea, and then I went to coaching meetings, and you do get a little bit of coaching, and I know they do that, and so that's kind of what I was expecting. So when I applied, and they were like, "Yo, submit your talk," I'm just like, "Oh." Went crazy for 30 minutes, and kind of just spat it out because at that point we're getting closer to the deadline. I was like, man, I just need to get this done. It's not what I was expecting. I need to get it done. And the talk was just about the power of networks. I never realized the power of a network until I went to business school. Man, business school really opens your eyes to how important it is to network. And that's why I got the job I have now. I had all the qualifications before to be a scientist, but I couldn't get the job of the scientist until I networked and, went and did all the stuff I did at UW. And so as basically was the gist of my talk was just talking about how, importance of networks and stuff like that. But the next talk I'd like to submit is a little teaser. It's because now I feel in my life that we all live multiple lifetimes. So
you do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is, there is no guarantee we're going to die at 80 years old or whatever the case is. So the way I think about it is basically 18 years is a lifetime, right? Like you have your first 18 years of life, you graduate high school. Excuse me. And then now I just turned 36, right? So that's another 18 years. So it's like my first lifetime, it was hard, right? I had to deal with a lot of my environmental nonsense. And then my second lifetime, and I almost, my senior year in high school, I had a gun to my head. I felt worthless. I felt like I had zero, there was nothing I could ever accomplish or do. I just felt complete, like I was just wasting people's air. And so that first 18 years, I didn't think I could do. And in that first lifetime, I didn't think I could do the things that I'm doing in the second lifetime. And now I just got done with my second lifetime, right? I became a sniper, made a childhood dream happen. I got my degrees, something I never thought I could do, in engineering and chemistry. And then wrote a book and filed a patent and went to business school and became a scientist ultimately before my 36th birthday. And so I'm like, damn, now I have, these 2 lifetimes or the things that I've done. Now I have another third lifetime I'm pushing into, right? With my entrepreneurial stuff, my book, my patent, the other things I hope to do in the future. And so I was like, dang, I hope to get another 18 years out of this body and hopefully have another lifetime of things I can kind of make happen. And who knows, man, because ultimately my goal is to end up in space, whether that's me paying for it or NASA sending me up, my goal.
If Elon Musk says, Ricardo, you be the first one to Mars, you're like ding, ding, ding.
That's a tough one. If there's a plan to try to come back, I'd be more for it than a one-way trip. But yeah, man, that's still tempting. My wife might not like hearing that, but
probably not.
It's still I actually signed up to be, I don't know, I'd butcher his name. He's a Japanese entrepreneur, and he literally bought out all this seats for one of the SpaceX flights, for the first one that's going to go past the moon and come back. And he just had a competition where he opened it up to the world. Yo, you want to go to space on my flight? I got 12 seats. Cause he bought, I think it's 20 seats. And he's taking 8 guests or something, right? So it's him, a couple of his guests, and he had the rest of those seats. He opened it up to applications of people around the world. And so I applied, I was like, man, send me to space. It's whether I'm paying for it or NASA's sending me, I'm going to go. And so, yeah, I hope in this next 18 years, man, whether that be whenever I'm about to turn 60 or whatever, like getting up there. But yeah, it's funny because my wife always, I laugh and joke with her about all the different things I'd like to do in my lifetime. And it's funny because she was looking at, what's his name? It's one of the recent astronauts. I can't remember. Anyways, but if you go to his Wikipedia page, it'll be like scientist, engineer, astronaut, singer, songwriter. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, my wife started laughing about that. I was like, yes, so it's going to be me. It's going to be like sniper, scientist, engineer, astronaut, rapper, you know what I'm saying? Like whatever, just going crazy. Actually, I also want to get into endurance racing, endurance racer. I was like, so yeah, who knows what's going to happen in the next 18 years? But that's basically what I want my next submission TEDx talk to be about, because our lifetimes, man, like, and who's to say that my next lifetime is going to be good? This next 18 years, God forbid my kids, I could have one of my kids lose their lives, or, you know what I'm saying? Like,
you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, life is going to shit on us. And what I always tell people, what I've learned is it's important to not get too high when things are going good, right? Like, yeah, life's going good, things are trending your way. And I'm not saying like you shouldn't celebrate yourself or relish in your accomplishments, but you also need to remember, like, life isn't good all the time forever. At some point, life's going to shit on you. And when life shits on you, it's important to not get too low, right? You can't get too high and you can't get too low. And I'm not saying don't be depressed, don't wallow in your shit, but try to minimize it, right? Like, obviously you lose a loved one, something traumatic happens. I'm not saying you don't have the right to be depressed for 3 to 6 months. But at some point you need to start pulling yourself back up. You can't get too low, man, because it's too easy to stay down there,
Have you seen this talk? It was Tom Hanks. There's a bunch of other actors. It's kind of a round table, just about acting, stuff like that. And talk about how, like, sometimes, as an actor or whatever, like, people shit on them, right? Talking they're horrible, whatever, and how they get depression, bad stuff. And Tom Hanks, like, you got to remember, this is going to pass, right? This time will cure all wounds. It's going to pass. However, when everyone says you're the best thing ever, this too shall pass.
Yeah, no doubt. Because, no matter what heights we reach, man, we're all the flavor of the minute, like, you might be the champion of the world, the fastest Olympic runner or something, but man, Father Time comes for us all. And, eventually you get relegated to the history books, and there's nothing wrong with being in the history book, man. But, you can't expect, to be at the top forever, and that's part of, what I think that goes back to the patience thing too, is like, things are going well, and when they don't, you get impatient because you're like, man, when things go well, time goes fast, right? When you're having a good time goes fast. And so, I think that plays a lot into the patience thing, is because when things aren't going well, man, time just feels like it's, you know what I'm saying? Like, you just feel like you're stuck, like day to day, you're just stuck. And it's hard to be patient. And especially whenever you're trying to work out of that depression and you're not getting the results you expect right away, it's like, it's a big part of the patience and making sure you're not too high or low, because things don't happen that fast. So if you put yourself too low and make your expectations too high, you're going to put yourself even lower, because you're like, I'm doing all this work and it's not working. And it's like, what I always tell my Army buddy, I always tell him, you've been on a decade-long train wreck. You're going to need more than a year to get back on track. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't destroy your life for 10 years and think in 1 month you're going to get things back going.
No,
I mean, you can start to, and you can start trending things in the right way, but it's a multi-year long process to recover the person you were before everything you went through.
So here's a funny story. So I was in the Bay Area for a visit, right? And I saw the BART. I was on the BART the first time. And so I'm on the BART, and this guy walks in the middle of the train, right? This guy is like, he's caked in dirt. He has on a sleeping bag. I have no idea if his clothes on beside a sleeping bag. He's like dirt everywhere, just looking nasty. He's saying, can someone give me $1? I'm telling myself, dude, you need more than $1. Like, dude, you need someone to invest in your life to make your life better, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is $1 going to do for you, right? Like, nothing, exactly. Right? Someone needs to take you aside. Hey, guy, I'm a volunteer you in my life to make you better, right?
Mhm.
And even then, we probably won't be enough, right?
Yeah. It's funny because I went to Dick's Burgers I've never had a Dick's Burger.
Me neither. I've never had Dick's Burger.
Really?
No, I've never
Oh
had Dick's
my
Burger.
God, dude. I just had one this past week.
Never had one.
I never had one. And I'm like, now that I'm possibly getting ready to leave, I'm like, man, I need to look at other food spots around where I work, maybe a 5 to 10 minute drive. So I can just get a little bit more, cultured in the different cuisines around here. And so I saw Dick's Burgers. I was like, oh, damn, I never knew a Dick's Burgers was right here in East Lake area, like by where I work. So I went, and then I'm standing in line, and a homeless guy comes up, like, he's asking, talking people, whatever. And I was just talking to my army buddy. Like I said, I talked to him almost every day. So I had just hung up with him, and I think he saw that I was in a good mood, and I think he saw that I was happy. I was in a good mood, man. Like things, especially with that interview and the way things are going over these last 2 weeks, I've been in a pretty good mood overall. And so he came up and he was like, hey, because I think it was yesterday, they did 19-cent burger day. So you could have gone to Dick's and got a burger for 19 cents. So it was the day before that. So the homeless guy was like, oh man, I thought it was, 19-cent burger day. Do you mind buying me a burger? I'm hungry, whatever. I was like, yeah, man, I got you, whatever. I was just, because I was hungry. Like I tell you, I only eat once a day. So when that hunger hits, like, man, like I need something, And so I felt really hungry, and I didn't want that guy to go to sleep hungry. You know what I'm saying? Like he's a human being, he's, people, these other people might not look at him like that, but I'm like, nah, man, you're not going hungry tonight. I'm here. So I was like, because there's like the Dick's Deluxe, and then that's like the most expensive burger they have, and then there's just the normal Dick's or something. And I was like, what do you want, a Dick's? Because in my mind, I don't, I've never been there before. I don't know anything on the menu. And he's like, huh, can I get a Dick's Deluxe? And I was like, you know what, man? Yeah, I'll get you a Dick's Deluxe. And that ended up the Deluxe has 2 meats in it. The regular just has one. And so I got the burgers and I gave it to him. And I gave him, he's like, oh, thank you. I was like, oh, no, man, like take care of yourself tonight. Like, man, just, be safe, take care of yourself. And he's like, and he tells me, it makes it a lot easier with people like you, man. Like, yeah, it's easier to take care of myself, when there's people like you to, lend a helping hand. I'm like, that's all it's about. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm sure a lot of those people around me make more than my little measly RS1 salary, like, man. And like I said, man, for me, it was just like having that hunger. And because when, like, earlier when we were eating, I was like, man, I need to eat. Like I eat once a day. This is the point where I need to eat. And so like just feeling that hunger, and
yeah,
I couldn't imagine.
That's a good call. That's a good call we ate earlier, because I knew this was gonna be a kind of long talk. So yeah, I can imagine if we didn't eat earlier.
Yeah, my stomach would be flipping right now. but yeah, man, and it's just like those things. It's we all get we all have the capacity to be evil or good. We all have the capacity to be up or in a better position, and we all have the ability. Like that's one thing in the recession taught a lot of people. I think in 2008 was. You might have all these nice things, but at the whim of Vladimir Putin over, you know what I'm saying? Like the whims of these people, man. You
never know how something else thousands of miles away is going to affect you
or
not affect you.
So it's kind of these things like, yeah, man, I've experienced life enough on both sides. And it's funny because I always have people come tell me like, man, you're so humble, you're so cool. Like I'm just me, man. Just because I got my degrees, just because I served in the military, that doesn't define it. And that's one thing about me is I've always tried to stay true to who I am. And that's why I like spending time with myself, with quiet, because it really, I feel like that's what keeps me grounded. It's like I'm thinking about not only what I want to make happen, but situations that are currently happening and how I handle those situations and how I could get better at them. And, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, one thing I think when I realized the human race, like I was thinking we realized that how much experimentation we've done as human race, right? Like imagine like how many people had to die from eating poison mushrooms
exactly.
before they say we should eat this no more. Or like, how many people, like walked out into the ocean and died, maybe while 20 people walked out there, maybe we should not, like the amount of experimentation to get the fact we are, and even just like the immune system, right? Like how many people died from diseases back in the day that we don't even think of, right? Just like constant experimentation of the human race, right? I don't think people will get that.
Yeah, and that's a big part of this journey of eating once a day is now that I eat once a day, I know what's going in my body and I know how it's reacting with my body. So it's kind of crazy for me to eat something and know like, man, now
because the human body, we're not meant to eat like 10, 12 times a day.
Yeah. And there's actually, I think it was I can't remember his name, but there's like a TV journalist or whatever. He comes out on like the news stations. He talks about keeping a food journal. And I was like, man, this is a powerful thing. I wish, I'm definitely going to do this one of these days. Obviously my kids need to be a bit older and I need to be able to have more structure in my life to do this. But he says, what you should do is you should eat something, write it down. And then like 2 hours later, write down how it makes you feel. And you do that enough and you're going to find your superfoods. You're going to find the things that make you feel like energized and, happy. And it's really funny because he talks about how whenever he needs to come up with something novel, like new ideas for maybe a new book or, whatever, he eats pickles because he knows if he eats pickles, that kind of spurs the novel, imaginative kind of juices in his brain. And he goes on to other examples of it. And I'm like, dang, how kind of, imagine the power of that being a musician or a music producer or an artist or something and be like, yo, I need to get these creative juices flowing. Let me eat, a mango or, what I'm saying? And then to get that extra boost rather than, what, I'm feeling creative. Let me go get a Subway. I'm hungry and I want to do art. Let me go get a Subway, and ultimately that's going to be a more detriment than a help kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Even better what foods not to eat. Like me, I love Mexican food, right? If I eat Mexican food, I'm probably not gonna be productive another 2-3 hours, right?
Yeah, man. Well, that's those things is, I kind of started this early on. It's easier to do now that I work because I'm away from home a lot, but I started this at home for a small stint, maybe like 3 to 6 months. And people say, oh, you're going keto. I think that's what they refer to it. I was like, no, I mean, I guess, but then I drink like a soda a day. I eat hard candy. So it's like, I'm trying to minimize like chewing food and digesting food. Like I will still take in sweets. Some people are like, oh, that's not keto.
Because your system needs a break once in a while.
Yeah. And so, but man, I'll never forget my first time doing this. Like I think it was before even I got into my graduate program at business school. I started eating clean for a few weeks, and then like I would eventually occasionally fall off the horse and eat a giant slice of pizza or like very carb heavy stuff. Man, that it will put you down. Like it will drag you down and put you to sleep.
It does.
And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, whoa, like this is really weird. Like it tastes good, but now I'm like, can't do nothing for 2 hours, like, man, it's crazy.
One thing I want to try this carnivore diet that people are talking about. We eat nothing but meat. I want to try it.
I think we talked about that a little bit. That's literally how I lived before my wife.
I want to try that. I want to try the carnivore diet, like eat a steak every meal or something like that. Something crazy.
I did literally, I mean, I probably had like some green beans and a little bit of other stuff on the side, but for sure dinner. And of course, you're in the Army, you're going to the DFAC, you're getting your other little bit of food, but for sure dinner, man, I was just having steaks. I was like, yo, I can afford to just have steaks for dinner. Why not? So, and my wife, when my wife first moved in with me, she was just like, where's your microwave? I was like, why do I need a microwave? I'm like, I just cook steaks, like I ain't reheating anything. I'm just cooking fresh steaks and I'm never home, right? I'm at work all day, and when I'm here at dinner, it's steak time. So yeah, I mean, that's and I was a lean, mean fighting machine, man. I was in great shape. That's what got me ready for the sniper team was my carnivore. It wasn't strictly carnivore, but and then my wife came and added all the sugars and sweets and carbs and other stuff, and then my platoon sergeants were like, Perez, you putting on some weight? Like, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So we talked about edibles earlier. One thing that's like kind of crazy, of course, in the military does drug tests, and of course, you get only people in the military like hyped up on drugs, marijuana, case would be. But like, I'm not saying every veteran I know is on drugs. I'm not saying every veteran does drugs, but every veteran I know has either done edibles, marijuana, maximum mushrooms, LSD. They've done some kind of drug. Just kind of crazy how like go from like no drugs at all, like it's like they're almost like a rebellion thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of benefits to some of these drugs, right? And that it's been proven to data, stats, just stories, people say I've been depressed, they take some edibles, they're happy, whatever. Same thing with the massive mushrooms, the microdosing. It's just, and it's crazy. Like only like you're watching, you do it. You fly to Texas. I mean, people still doing Texas, of course, but you're not gonna do so public about it. Here,
it's really unfortunate. It's kind of stupid to have to.
Like how marijuana is a class 1 drug. I mean, I'll never understand.
Yeah, it's propaganda nonsense that. It's political nonsense is what it boils down to, other interests and lobbies of, actual, trees and cotton, and you know what I'm saying, like business interest. And that's kind of like and it's funny because before I went to business school, I kind of always had that underlying, I guess feeling is not really the right word, but like that underlying kind of conditioning of business people are shitty, like businessmen, being in business, you got to be shitty and backstabby or whatever. But it's really quite the opposite. Like most businesses and business owners want the best for their business and their customers, right? Because if they didn't, we wouldn't have all the remarkable things that we have now, So not, like I said, there's always those bad actors and those shit bags, no matter how many gates you put in place. But for the most part, man, business owners and these corporations, obviously a corporation gets so big and, it's hard to rein in and control something that's the size of Amazon, right? So, at some point the company grows, it gets harder to manage. But these early stage startups, and at the end of the day, they it's when they go public that they get in trouble, because then they got shareholders that they, gotta kind of, at the end of the day, make more rich. So
Ricardo, is there anything else I asked you that I didn't, or anything else you want to talk about?
No, just other than, the book's available online on Amazon. The ebook is for pre-order right now, and the paperback book is available now. The crazy thing with the paperback, right? So I got the email that it was approved. I went to order like author copies of the book, right? Like copies for the printed price, author copies of the book. So I ordered 8 copies, and they're telling me like, oh, you'll get them mid-April, or like 2 weeks in April. I told my buddy from high school the book's out. He goes and buys it at the full price, and he's supposed to be getting it today. I don't know if he got it today or not, but I just thought that was weird. Like, dude, I ordered 8 copies, and who cares if I paid the author's price for them? Like, I should get them faster. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, you think,
yeah. So regardless, weird stuff, but book's available now, paperback. I'm working on getting quotes for the hardcover version. So
so what kind of quotes you get? Does that have to be some fucking famous people, just regular people, or just people who
yeah,
read your
man.
book? Or?
I don't. Yeah, just whoever. It's kind of. I was gonna add that to my LinkedIn post. I was gonna be like anybody with clout, but I was like, it's such a cringy. Yeah, LinkedIn's cringy enough. Like I'm not gonna, So yeah, so that's why I just posted it like that. And like, I really don't care, man. I mean, it'd be cool to have like a Medal of Honor recipient or a politician, or I actually was wanting to try to get a neuroscientist to, like, I'd actually like to get my brain scanned and see if there's something different about my crazy brain than, because I feel like the things that I've experienced have really formed and changed my brain and its chemistry. So I'd like to, that's a kind of a tangent, but yeah, man, like I said, I'm athletes, other authors, like, I just please, like I said, I'm just playing the percentages. I need as many people as I can, clout or not, whatever.
And plus you need reviews. Amazon's big on reviews. So you need Amazon reviews too, right?
So right now, it's all available online, and I'll probably make the ebook available sooner than April 20th, which is it's on pre-order now. Especially if my buddy gets his book today. There's kind of no point in having the ebook unavailable when people are receiving the physical copy. So I'm going to message him after this and see if he did get it today. And regardless, that ebook is for pre-order. It'll, whenever it's on there for $5.99 or $4.99 now, when I release it, it'll be 99 cents. So, pick it up. I'm not going to make a lot of money off it, but any money that does get made off it, it goes back to, these other things and these other lifting the voices, getting the documentary done. So yeah, just get the book, learn the story, and don't Google search Fifth Brigade. That's a waste of time. Read my book.
So I was going to ask you, why the title Born to Fail?
It's kind of funny. I always knew that I wanted fail, or actually, what was the original title of the book? I can't even remember at this point. I remember from what I wanted to call it in Afghanistan, which is not PC, and, definitely don't want to go there with it. But I was a disgruntled soldier, just angry at the world. So I wanted to make it an ugly book title. And, but yeah, then something, I can't remember what I wanted to call it, but all I know is I wanted it to have something with fail or failure. So I was like, man, I don't know what I want it to be titled, but I just wanted to have fail or failure. And so I'm like running all these different things in my head. And then I read David Goggins' book. And at the end of one of his first chapters, he mentions we are all born to fail. And I was like, boom, there it is, right? Like I was wanting failure in the title, and he literally named my book for me, Born to Fail, because we're all born to fail. And so I was like, dang, like, and then of course you have to put the positive twist around it, embrace hardship to, because you don't want just a negative. And that's another thing about, if I do get picked up by a big time publisher, they're probably going to want to change the title of the book, because the convention of writing books is you never make your title negative, right? Failure is a negative word. Born to fail is negative connotation. So there's a chance, but that's why I put the positive twist on it too. Embrace hardship to forge your warrior spirit, because like I said, it's not, failure is essential to everybody. We grow, we learn, and we get better. So that's what I'm saying. Just
I think someone said it. It's better to fail 10 times, succeed once, than to succeed 3 times with no failure, or something like that.
Yeah. And then it's kind of funny, because another example of this is another startup company that creates jerky products has animals. Like, so if they have beef jerky, they got a little picture of a cow on the jerky package. And if it's like chicken jerky or whatever. And whenever they started the company, they were getting feedback like, no, you don't want to put the animals' pictures on the packages. Like, consumers aren't going to like that, blah, blah. And they're like, no, we feel like it's fine. Like, we don't, people, you're eating beef, it's a cow, like, just because there's a picture or not. So they ended up just doing what they felt was right, and ended up being a super successful company. And they're like, yeah, people were trying to get us early on to change our labels and our logos and our name, because they felt like it was going to push customers away. And it's funny, because I did Scribe Media, which is who did David Goggins' memoir. I did their masterclass on memoir, and it was through that self-publishing subreddit, right? Somebody on that self-publishing subreddit said, hey guys, masterclass, like the masterclass website is hiring Scribe to do a masterclass on writing memoirs. So we're going to record this event. If you'd like to join it, you can join it for free. So I literally got a masterclass on memoir writing by Scribe Media, who does memoirs for all these famous celebrities and people. And they literally said in that class, you don't want your memoir to have a negative title.
Okay.
And so I was just like, I'm going to name it Born to Fail anyway. Like, I don't care what you say, because I feel like this is what it should be named, so that's where I came up with the title. Thank you, David Goggins. I know you probably never see this, but yeah.
So Ricardo, can you share your social media so people can reach out to you?
Yeah. You can look me up on Amazon. Now I just created my Amazon author page, amazon.com/author/Ricardo P. Perez. My website, you can sign up on my newsletter and get full transparency of how the money is being spent. Every quarter of the year, I'm going to send out an expense revenue report of how the money's, what money's coming in and how it's getting spent. So sign up for my newsletter, ricardopperez.com. Social media, you can find me on Facebook. Just type Ricardo Perez. You probably find my actual page or my author page. Twitter is at The Real Chemja. It's kind of a mix of chemistry and ninja. I'm the chemical ninja, so I'm the Chemja. So yeah, Twitter at The Real Chemja, and Instagram, I'm pretty sure it's just my name, Ricardo Perez. So yeah, I don't use any of it at all, but hey, it's there.
And to a listener, we have the links to all his social media on the show notes. You find the show notes at www.cavenishhrblog.com. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Jason Cavendish Experience on your favorite podcast platform. So Ricardo, any last minute advice or wisdom or anything you want to talk about?
No, man, I think this is good for now, man. I appreciate your time as always. I love what you do. I love that you give people this platform, and I love that you're pushing your stuff forward now, man. It's you're getting into your later lifetimes, and now it should be all about you now, man. So yes. I'm really happy, and I'm always here to support you. So no matter what I
need for you to tell my wife and kids that, okay? That's all about me. It should all be about me now.
Yeah, for sure.
So listeners, thanks for your time, and remember to be great every day.